Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Scrutiny Committee of Basingstoke Borough Council. This is a meeting in public, not a public meeting. I'm told there are no plans for a fire drill tonight, so if we hear the fire drill, then we must leave the room immediately and the building. Fire exits down there and around here. The meeting is, I'm told, being webcast, so I can't see any evidence of it. Yes, I'm told it is live, so if you're in the front row, as only Councillor Tilbury is, you might appear on the webcast. And will everybody please turn off their mobile phones, or if you must, keep it on silent. I haven't received any apologies for absence, but I have some substitutions. Councillor Golding here on behalf of Councillor Goddison, Councillor Tate on behalf of Councillor Faulkner, and Councillor Pearce here on behalf of Councillor Potter. Are there any other apologies for absence or substitutions? Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest to matters on the agenda? Well, we have the minutes of 3 committee meetings here for approval. The meeting of the 4th of November. Any comments? Those agreed? Thank you. The 20th of November. Those agreed? Thank you. And the 26th of November. Agreed? Thank you. Are there any urgent matters that we haven't been informed of? I'm not aware of any. Okay, well, we now have the referral from the full council of the Anvil Arts motion. The mover of the motion, Councillor Tilbury, is here, and I know he'd like to say something, so would you like to come forward in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I was speaking for too long, but I passed some sort of graphs, some of the financial information on there that I've dug out over the years. Hopefully, you've got some on both sides there now. So, oh yeah, well, I mean, basically, what the question is, what's going on here? The numbers and the falling income, falling attendances, you know, why have we at Basingstoke and Dean not noticed this obvious decline? I mean, the management reports from the Anvil Trust are sent to Basingstoke and Dean regularly, but who actually reads them? We don't have an arts officer anymore, which I think that used to be dealt with, you know, when we had someone who actually could look at this. So then we have the curious incident of the dog in the night time, or more accurately, the councillors that didn't bark. Throughout this period, both Basingstoke and Dean and Hampshire County Council have nominated councillors to the trust, yet at no point have any of them raised alarm or concerns. What is the point in nominating councillors to the board if it does not lead to a greater understanding of our business partners' circumstances? I'm aware there is always going to be an issue with any outside body, particularly a charity where there are trustees. However, this just makes the point. What is the purpose of nominating councillors to outside bodies anyway? Particularly when we subsidise to the tune of £1.2 million every year, if it gives no insight into what is going on in the organisation. Is it the recession? Well, the simple answer is no. I mean, I've looked at some of the other theatres around, and most of them seem to be doing very well. In fact, some of you would look at the Mayflower figures. I mean, they've almost doubled their turnover in the same period that ours has gone down. I mean, obviously, Mr. Finney, ex-Councillor Finney seems to think so. He seems to think it is down to the recession, and that was sort of raised when I raised this during the commissioning process. But the evidence from other theatres doesn't seem to show that. First, well, the other thing, what can we do to help them? I think, firstly, better long-term monitoring of performance. When I asked for the past records, I was advised that we throw them away after 5 years. Fortunately, I don't, and still had all the financial reports from 10 years ago. I don't believe we should attempt to micromanage the venues. However, given the performance of Ipswich Borough Council in running their theatre in-house, perhaps we should consider managing them ourselves. However, what became very clear when I started looking at other theatres as a result of the commissioning process was that they were doing much more to sell themselves and, more importantly, their seats. And by chance, I had a phone call from a lady this morning from Tadley, funnily enough, who says that they don't go to the theatre around here very much because it's too expensive. They tend to go to Windsor and other areas around here. And one thing she raised, and which is raised by a number of people, is, you know, if they haven't sold tickets on the night, why not sell them cheaper? Well, I know there's an issue with that, because if your attendance are low to start with, you don't want to start encouraging people to hope that they can come along and get a cheap seat, because that doesn't help anyone. But darling, that just gives an idea of the level of the problem. But other areas do that, so that's another way of getting people in. There's some cheaper, much of the students, those sorts of issues there. So I think there's a lot of things we could be doing with this, but you know, I think the big issue is why did we not notice this coming? You know, why have we been kept in the dark for so long? And to a certain extent, yes, you could argue we haven't had an arts officer for years, and that may have been a bit of a saving that hasn't actually saved as much money and hasn't helped them. But the point is, you know, we've got to start looking at this. You can't let, you know, the argument that it's the recession is wearing a bit thin now. It's 2015 now, it's not 2008. So I think that's all I want to say on that. And obviously, if anyone's got any questions, I'm sure it'll all come up at some point. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'm going to propose from the chair that this be referred to the performance panel to undertake discussions with the management of the Anvil and then report back at an appropriate time to this committee. Councillor Pearce is sitting on the committee tonight, and I know he wants to speak on that, and then we'll find out if anybody else wants to afterwards. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chair. I just really wanted to draw your attention so we realise the depth of issues that we've got to look at. One of the things you might be interested in, because I also have some of the figures from some years ago, I was able to see precisely what profit the Anvil and the Haymarket made separately with amateurs and professionals. And it's fascinating. You look at April 2006, and the amateurs brought a gross profit of 12.9 thousand. The professionals was only 8.8. And the following month, it was 22.5 and 16.9. In the following month, it was an equal difference. So it begs the question as to how do the amateur shows end up making a larger contribution to the coffers than the others. The other thing that we need to look at is, when we're looking at costs, we need to look at the cost of what they call a dark night. Mostly August is dark in theatre terms for maintenance. But looking at the more recent figures, they're certainly not every night of the week by any stretch of the imagination. And not only that, but out of all the shows at the Anvil between October 13 and September 14, so that's a year, 57 of them all netted less than 50% audience. So can we just be clear? That's in a theatre that takes between 11 and 1,200 people, less than 600 turned in. And we know also, because of the way they operate the ticketing system now, that for many, many shows, they only release the central block to start with, and only when that is sold do they open up the rest of the theatre, which is an indication that they know what's going on. And the final thing that I'll say, and then I will be quiet, Chair, is, for the moment anyway, is the overall issue of the pantomime. And the pantomime was hugely, hugely disappointing. Many theatres, King's in Southsea is one I know very well, rely on their pantomime, their 42 or 46 or 48 performances over the 3 or 4 weeks at Christmas. That pays their staff salaries for the year. We had 53% sales last year in 2013 for the pantomime. And this is the show that's supposed to bring them in. All over the country, pantomimes do that. So it isn't that we've just got to have a quick look. We've actually got to delve rather more deeply into how the venues work, how they, if they are able to cross-subsidise, and also within that less than 50% sold, without going into any more detail, you will see a pattern. I'm afraid to say that a lot of the classical concerts don't play to anything like full houses. And we're looking at figures of 15, 20, 28 sometimes. So it's a much, much bigger issue than, let's check out on the grant. It's about what we can do and how we can help to improve sales in what, after all, are flagships. I mean, having a Haymarket in a town this size, and the Anvil, which is the 6th best natural acoustic in the country, makes us a flagship for the performing arts. And we need that place full. I don't mind how we do it, but we need it full, not 20%, 30%, and so on. So if we can bear those comments in mind, Chair, I look very much into the future at making Basingstoke the cultural centre of the Central South.
Thank you. We welcome your work and your expertise, and I hope you'll join the performance panel when it does meet with the management there, Councillor Pearce. My own claim to fame in the theatre world is limited to being blamed for the closure of the Royal Exchange Theatre between Christmas and New Year 1981. You have to read my memoirs to find more. Anyone else wants? Yes, Lisa, go.
Thank you, Chair. It's just come to me, and it might be helpful for members, in terms of the decision notice which came out of the Commissioning Outcome Group 1 around arts and culture. That made a recommendation about the strategic grant for the Anvil, and work that my team will do is around the bespoke funding agreement for that. And what I propose is that that's linked into the work of Performance Panel, because what we don't want to do is Performance Panel come up with some recommendations that then haven't been formally identified in the funding agreement to the Anvil. So I suggest that we would need to link those two bits of work together, and I'll happily make sure that happens, Chair.
Councillor Keating, do you want to comment on that?
Could I just comment on the basic issue first, if I may, Chair? I'm on record over the years of being unhappy with the level of subsidy relative to the level of public good in terms of the theatres in Basingstoke. I do believe that there is and should be an opportunity to introduce young people, certainly those in secondary schools, in and around the town, to the arts and cultural events by offering the schools access at a subsidized level or a reduced entrance fee because of the amount of public funds that go into these theatres. That will have the effect of increasing the number of people who are attending any particular event, but it would also have the effect of introducing young people to this form of entertainment. I know when I was a young person, long time ago, I know, that being taken to the opera house for different types of shows, it introduced me to the value and the benefits of arts and culture in a direct way. So I do believe schools, especially secondary schools, should be offered the opportunity for substantially reduced fees to add to the people who go. The other thing that I really find difficult to understand is we have a theatre which stands in a very good, well-trodden street in the top of town. The only image it projects every single solitary day is it's closed. It's empty. Now, any theatre that portrays itself as dark and empty also portrays itself as unwelcoming and probably disused, certainly underused. And I find that criminal. The other point that I really do feel difficult in understanding, if I walk into the Anvil to book a ticket and offer my plastic card, they charge me £1 because I'm buying their ticket. No, I have never been to any other theatre or other form of, cultural entertainment whereby you pay your ticket price and then they charge you £1. Now, in all honesty, I find that extraordinary.
Sean, I
Not-
think we're
I'm not
getting
finished.
into too much detail for this meeting.
I beg your pardon?
I think we're getting into too much detail for that meeting.
I'll just finish. I'll finish at that. Can I now turn to the issues about the performance panel? You may not understand, but the performance panel happens to be chaired by me. It's a subcommittee. It's a subcommittee of this whole scrutiny group, and I chair it because I was elected to the position at the first meeting of this scrutiny arrangement. It is not webcast. The performance panel is not webcast. And therefore, I have adopted, and you have agreed, the approach of, we'll have the performance panel, we'll examine performance in detail, and we'll invite people to come along to make presentations or to answer questions. But all of the minutes of all of the performance panels are attached to and integral to the minutes of the scrutiny committee. So every member of the scrutiny committee gets all of the performance panel minutes. In addition to that, as chair of the performance panel, I identify specific or significant issues from the performance panel for your attention at each occasion. On this occasion, knowing Councillor Pearce's both interest and knowledge of the issue, and at his request, I have invited him to join the performance panel for the next meeting that dealing with the arts and culture, and anyone else who has an interest should identify and they can come along. So when we have the performance panel about the Haymarket and the Anvil, it'll be a detailed one and you will get the minutes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sean. Does anyone else want to say something on this topic? Councillor Harvey, briefly, please.
Just briefly, I just want to pick up. I'm sure everybody around the table appreciates, how important the Anvil and the Haymarket is. There we go. We've said it. I think if the analysis is as effective as has been described thus far, I think in terms of the COG position on this and what was, the predetermined position on the Anvil and the Haymarket, I think we would benefit. So what the officer has said in terms of taking what was part of the COG and the element that came out of the decision notice, and Andrew Finney came along and spoke at the cabinet meeting, and of course the goalpost changed as a result of that. All of that needs to be carefully looked at alongside what the performance panel does, so that we get a coherent and consistent change to the benefit of the Haymarket and the Anvil, should that be the conclusions that they come to at the performance panel with the evidence in front of them. So I do agree, I don't think we should have a left hand and a right hand going off doing different things, but if we draw it together, I do hope there will be some acceptance that there could be recommendations that were flowing from that piece of work that I would hope the Cabinet were listening to and would adopt and would pay attention to respectfully from this body as the Scrutiny Committee once we get that far.
Thank you. Well, I now formally move that we refer this motion to the performance panel. Can I see those in favour of that proposal, please? Is anybody against that? Right, that's what will happen then. We will let everybody know the date, because we know that our colleagues from the Anvil aren't available on the date that we had already planned to meet. Go ahead.
Having been made aware today of the difficulty of the witnesses from the Anvil and elsewhere, I have identified a willingness to find a suitable date where everybody would be able to attend. Thank you.
Now, the next item is commissioning, review of year one and next steps. We have a guest with us this evening, Mr. Ian Briggs, and I propose to ask him to talk to us on the subject of commissioning first. Then we'll look at and discuss the reports of the survey, and then we'll ask the head of commissioning to lead us off with a presentation. So welcome, Mr. Briggs. Yes.
Thank you. I'm sure it would be fascinating to hear our guests speak, and this is no disrespect, but I don't see the item on the agenda, nor do I see in the minutes any agreement of this committee to inviting a guest, Chair. I wonder if you'd like to clarify for me.
Can I say that the item on the agenda is commissioning review of year one and next steps, and it's a part of that item. We have discussed at earlier meetings Mr. Briggs' offer to come and decided it wasn't timely then, but I agreed with the Vice Chairman at our pre-meeting that we would timetable it in the way in which I've just said. We do follow the practice, although this committee has two vice chairmen, and both of them take part in the briefings. So I take responsibility for it being here, and I hope everybody will accept that that's me discharging my responsibility as chairman. Mr. Briggs.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Chairman, and thank you very much indeed, members. And can I just open by saying a big thank you, actually, to the Council for its willingness to open its doors to allow me to just have a brief look at what you were doing, which I think, without in any way kind of wishing to be in a position which I am not in, passing judgment about what you're doing, but to say that it is a very interesting process that you're involved in. And I would like to be very clear about saying that my role here tonight is in no way anything other than attending as an academic from a Russell Group university, where our key principle is about adding to bodies of learning, and I've got no interest whatsoever actually in any political approach that is actually taken around the subject. And I would like to say thank you very much indeed, because in the early summer of this year I was invited to attend COG 3 about public transportation, which I found an extremely interesting and well worth spent day actually with you. I think it's also worth noting at this stage that we have talked about strategic commissioning for a number of years, but it's largely been in the domain actually of county councils, largely in the domain of unitary authorities, London boroughs, metropolitan authorities. And there is a growing interest amongst councils such as Basingstoke and Dean in the way that you are taking steps to rethink the role actually of local authorities at a more local level with local populations. And it may have escaped your attention that there are other district councils who ask me and my colleagues in the university what a range of other councils are doing, whether they're from kind of East Anglia, kind of from the East Midlands or whatever. And very often Basingstoke and Dean is mentioned because there are things that are actually out in the network when people are curious about the approach that you're taking. So again, just to reiterate, perhaps, you know, that's my interest actually in being here, solely actually from an academic perspective. But I have put together one or two kind of points that I may just actually illustrate kind of where our interest comes from. So trying to go through that. And I mean, just briefly focus for a moment actually on the image kind of here, which I think illustrates kind of where we're at in the transition in our thinking about what local government is actually here to do for communities. Very often people will look at that image and say, well, as either a member or as an officer, what do you see? And you say, oh, well, we can see kind of lots of things that local authorities do. We see kind of street kind of collection for refuse. We see perhaps actually kind of the fact that we have an urban road here which is being gritted. We may see one or two planning issues, kind of some concerns with street lighting. But if we look at it a slightly different way, we can actually ask questions about why does the Highways Authority spend a minimum of £90 a kilometre kind of putting salt and grit on the road in inclement weather, but we don't know that at number 36 here is if an old lady lived there and she's actually kind of putting her kind of refuse collection out and her recycling out for collection. If she were to slip and fracture her hip, the state immediately faces a bill of £650,000 as an absolute minimum. So we're all being encouraged to think about a more joined up approach to the way that we think of our public services. And I can see that certainly the strides that you're taking here in Basingstoke and Dean are really significant in taking a much more joined up approach to the way that the citizens actually of this area kind of engage actually with the local authorities. So if I can move on and so that...
Could I just have do you have those slides? I'm sorry, we're speaking to the officers really.
Sorry.
Than you. Do we have those slides printed off, and can we have a last copy for Colin, please?
Don't have any printed off at the moment.
That would be helpful.
I think we do have a copy. We'll go and get one done.
That would be helpful. Thank you. Sorry.
I've been on this committee for over 3 years now. I should be provided with the appropriate paperwork for my disability. I'm patient, but it runs out at times.
Well, that's noted, Colin. I'm sorry that my attempt to help you before didn't work very well when I left the stuff on the printer. But, I'd like us to listen to Mr. Briggs.
If I may, Chair, I'll just focus on some of the salient points here. We know that for those who've got experience maybe at county level, that strategic commissioning is kind of very much part of the agenda in the general world of social care, children's services, dealing with troubled families. But it's only now beginning to filter down to district and borough council levels. And I think there's a really important agenda for us to actually follow with this. I think we're also very much aware these days that even if we use the contested word commissioning, and I know that it actually does divide opinion very strongly, is that we have to be very clear that we're not talking about just pure externalisation of services in this, that it is a much more sophisticated process. And it's a process which is really a shift away from silo functional delivery to one which is a much more citizen kind of centred approach to what we're doing. I know that central government are very strongly influenced by thinking about what they actually see with some of our European partners, where there is a much stronger connectivity between local governance and local communities. Go to Scandinavia, they get absolutely terrified actually when the turnout rate at local elections falls under 80%. But we know that in this country we have a terrible kind of democratic deficit, and how we actually kind of go through the process of encouraging citizens and our partners to get involved actually in local government business. So we're trying to shift away from the traditional administrative silo functional approach to the way that we think about our services towards a much more joined up approach. But we know that that brings problems with it, because we know that we're no longer able to solve one particular problem, complex problem that's given to us, without shunting some of that problem actually onto our partners, whether it be the third sector, citizens, community groups, our commercial partners and other local authorities, and even other parts of the public sector. So it presents us with a really, kind of complex problem to deal with. So if I've got one word actually, which is really kind of, I think, kind of germane to what you're attempting to do here, is that perhaps focus less on the work commissioning in your COG groups and focus much more on outcomes. Because I think it is that struggle towards actually finding shared outcomes that are across the piece, that actually have more connectivity with citizens. And I think this is where we're perhaps moving into a new phase actually in the way that we actually think about our public services, where we know that citizens are no longer that concerned about who delivers for them, as long as they actually are satisfied with what they get. And so it's actually a process of influence actually as well as delivery. So if I can just move on here. There's a real problem in that some local authorities do actually kind of take this as a very mechanistic, deterministic approach and data rational. It's actually one which we think is much more holistic, and there's much more mileage about thinking about imagination. And I think back some months ago, kind of the day that I spent here with COG 3 and walking around the tables and listening to what some of those participants were saying, it was a very fertile laboratory for ideas that came up. You know, there was caution, if we could do this, why have we thought of that? And I think that that is actually a marked departure from the way that we've thought about the way that we manage our services, actually, in terms of the way that we transform them. So it's much more about an holistic approach, it's much more imaginative in the way that we deal with, and much more in keeping with kind of what contemporary citizens kind of expect local government to deliver. But we've got some big challenges. We've got shrinking financial resources, and it does take me, somebody like me, to come along and actually kind of highlight this. This is kind of meat and drink to all of us. You know, we've got welters of new legislation coming up, and we know that the demand from citizens is actually increasing. Particularly, and there's maybe more to come as well, actually, kind of in the next few years. I won't focus on this, but the history of the way that we thought about it was the waves of commissioning that went back into the 1980s, which was largely about how we commissioned large kind of infrastructure, kind of PFI kind of were brought in on the back of this. 1990s, we went through, kind of those of us who are old enough, and I'm certainly one who can remember everything we did around CCT, compulsory competitive tendering. And then we've found, certainly in the last 10 years, that this agenda has been gradually applied to virtually everything that we do kind of in local government. We very often explain the process as actually falling into a cycle, kind of around we've got to be very careful about how we assess needs and understand what communities and citizens, partners, customers, whatever language we want to use, actually what their needs are. We've got to think about the kind of outcomes that we want, and increasingly we talk about these outcomes as not being just in the domain of one particular service area. They are cross-cutting. Transportation affects well-being, it affects the local economy, it affects kind of the growth and the attractiveness of SMEs actually into the locality, and those outcomes and being precise about them. It's not easy, and what I can see you doing is taking very positive steps to focus actually on what strategic outcomes you're looking for in Basingstoke and Deane, and for that I will commend you. But you've got to have a strategy. You've got to think about what you're doing. It's not a mechanistic process. We've also got to think about how we actually procure, how we go shopping, how we use the public spend to best effect to actually deliver those outcomes. And then you've got to actually put some time and resources into monitoring what you're doing, understanding what you're doing, and although it's not on the slide, you've got to learn from what you're doing. You know, we've got to, you know, really put a lot of effort into learning about how we've got to kind of change the way that we've done things from the past. Little slide here saying that maybe in the past we've actually seen, and I do apologise, I've actually taken this actually from somewhere else. I should have altered this rather than put City Council in the middle, but it could be any council. We've tended to think our governance arrangements are actually internal, focused on just what the authority does, and kind of maybe just got our satellite partners and kind of the people who we influence actually out there and work with as being separate from it. But we've got to move towards the future where our governance arrangements actually encompass kind of our partners. And again, I think there was evidence of what I've seen actually through your COG process actually about how that has actually been brought in into your way of working here, which I do find extremely interesting. What we see in terms of what other district councils are doing, district and borough councils, much more about involvement of citizens, partners, and working differently with the people who we contract with, whatever contractual relations with. Our contracted deliverers know an awful lot about what goes on actually on the ground. Going back years ago when we were actually going through the CCT regimes, we used to think that we needed a lot of clear air between ourselves as clients and the contractors. our bin lifters, street cleansing people, people involved in street scene know an awful lot about what citizens expect. So we've probably got to think these days about how we get closer to our contracted services and actually kind of we harvest the learning that they've got. We've got co-production on the agenda, which is about enabling citizens to actually deliver for themselves and to be involved actually kind of in the way that we co-produce services. And again, I think I've seen some indications about how that agenda is actually now beginning greater attention to what you're doing in Basingstoke and Dean. And I think I just wanted to finish actually by saying that I can see some merits in your approach in terms of what you're doing, in the sense that you've got some pretty strong groundwork now to build up a much stronger joined-up approach with your partners, with the county, kind of with those people who you work closely with, increasingly closely with, actually to make sure that the citizens of Basingstoke and Dean are satisfied with what we do. I think you've got a platform for debate to actually discuss outcomes and to actually kind of really think about what you do in terms of actually imaginative solutions to complex problems. I think that you've actually got some indication of a move towards kind of your ability to deal with complex issues as well as just think about the quality of the delivery of what you're doing. So I think actually I would just again like to say thank you very much indeed for getting close to you, because what is important to us as a university is that what's important to us is learning and understanding. And I think actually that you've kind of opened the door to us, and I think you do need to pat yourselves on the back a little bit for what you've been doing. And my advice, I know it's not an advice giving kind of scenario, but is to think, don't worry too much about the work commissioning. Think much more actually about the outcomes that you're working towards, because I think that's very much the future.
Thank you. Do you mind if we ask you some questions?
No, please do.
Well, I shall go first in that case. Although you began by saying this is not about externalisation, you haven't said anything about in-house provision. Would you like to comment on that?
I think it's a very good point, Chairman, because there is an assumption that there's a market for everything out there, that as soon as you actually kind of put an invitation to tender out, people will turn up to you and say, I want a slice of the action. There isn't always a perfect market out there for things that we do, because historically, a lot of the things that we do in local government, we do them because they were never attractive to the commercial sector. And part of the proper approach towards commissioning is actually having a strong and robust argument for delivering things yourself. Because very often we, and I will advisedly use the word we, because I do feel as though we're part of local government, we are very often in the best place to deliver. Because there are things out there that are very difficult to put a price on. No matter how much money you would throw at it, nobody would actually kind of come and do it. 2 years ago, we did a study where we looked at home care services for elderly people with dementia. And we looked at two areas. We looked at an urban area in the East Midlands and compared it to a very rural area in Norfolk. And the fact is that the authority in Norfolk were very keen to try and attract other providers in, because it was a very expensive provision for them. It was expensive because although the actual incidence of Alzheimer's and dementia in the population was commensurate with the East Midlands area, in a very dispersed population area, no private or voluntary provider would attempt to get involved in taking a contract from the authority, because the cost of delivering in a dispersed community was immense. In the East Midlands, it was very easy for somebody to park a car at the end of one street and do 3 home visits without returning to their car. To do this similar 3 visits in dispersed populations in Norfolk would have involved a drive of 150 miles. So therefore, there are very good reasons why we still need to think about the fact that local authorities have got to think about having direct provision for a whole host of services, even some that are non-statutory, because it's not always necessary that the market is there. And that's sometimes a bit difficult for people actually in political office to swallow.
So have you seen examples of where local authorities have a robust method of putting forward the internal alternative to externalisation?
In short, yes, Chairman. And there may be actually in some surprising places. The defining line between do we do it ourselves or get somebody to do it for us is not actually delineated by political control of authorities. I can find authorities, actually, conservative authorities that are very keen and knowledgeable about doing direct provision for themselves. I can also find local authorities that are controlled by the political left, who are very keen to attract the private sector into doing what they're doing. There are many, many instances, actually, of having robust, powerful arguments for self-provision.
Thank you. Perhaps outside the meeting you can give us some references. Gavin James, questions, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question about our own COG process. Obviously, the one that's kind of got to the end is COG 1. Now, that process started, now I'm looking at, you've obviously been around and seen lots of various sort of commissioning ideas and how we worked them. That process started on the 30th of January 2014. That was the first meeting of that COG. It finally met, I think, on the 8th of October. We then went through the committee process, the cabinet process, the scrutiny process, cabinet process again. So in total, that's 12 months, because we still haven't not there. We've had 9 COGs plus another 4 meetings. So 13 meetings, 12 months. And the outcome was soft market testing. To say, now we've got this far, we've got this information, now we're going to look at whether or not someone else is prepared to come in and do it for us. Now, we'll skip over the bit where we've already said we're not doing this, we're not doing that, we're only soft market testing, because that might come back with nothing, etc. But do you think that that an outcome is an adequate outcome for 12 months of work, 13 meetings, to have soft market testing, and we may yet have to go back to revisit the ideas all over again and go back to in-house eventually? Is that right? Is that normal?
I mean, again, Councillor James, really, really good questions. It's different in different places because the market is different in different places actually around the country. I think also it's worth noting that I don't think there is any one formulaic template about what you're doing that's more efficient than another. I do appreciate that a lot of time and resources have gone into getting as far as you have done. It's not easy. But I should imagine there are a number of councillors sitting around the table who've got very, very high-level commercial experience who will know that commercial organisations are facing exactly the same kind of problems that you're going in terms of the make or buy decision.
But in terms of an outcome that now says, well, soft market test, do you not think that within the process itself, that soft market testing should have happened? Not talking explicitly, obviously, of business in an open forum about signing a deal, but just testing whether there was an alternative. So when you get to the end of the COG process, you have very definitive choices rather than after the process, you now find out if there are other options. Should we not arrive at the point of, at the end of the COG process, we now have the choices before us and we can select the best one for our residents?
One would hope that you could, after going through kind of soft market testing, arrive at a very rational decision about the best way to go. But the market is dynamic, it changes. And the fact is that what look commercially attractive at one moment in time does change quite rapidly against another moment in time. And I would say that if you actually kind of think about the fact that you begin to build evidence over what is barely more than kind of a year about actually how the market for certain services is actually operating, we perhaps need to have longer evidence, longer process of time to actually judge how markets for things change. And I think this is where some local authorities are beginning to understand that their procurement process needs to change, not just to actually have procurement which is purely about enforcing a compliance process on what you're doing with the market and your relationship with commercial providers, but also for procurement to be the custodian of longer term data about how the market is actually operating, and not just within the geographical boundaries of the local authority, but to look at it from a regional perspective. So perhaps one way of actually kind of answering your question is to think about actually how you use kind of procurement internally to be able to forecast how markets are actually changing locally.
Thank you, Paul Harvey.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. To start with, and just in terms of framing my question, this isn't just an academic exercise for us. These are people's jobs. and these are services that are directly received by our residents. So this isn't an academic exercise, and I must, Chair, actually declare my interest, because the slide that our colleague put up there from Birmingham University, the very first slide, is identical to almost the one I use and the activity I use in teaching my foundation social sciences course at the OU. That's exactly what I do with my students when I start them thinking about this subject matter at the foundation level. So I will declare my interest with the OU there. But it does provoke a point that you commented on a couple of things. I'll just pick out what you said. You talked about rethinking the role of local governments, and I think there was something you didn't mention, which was the much bigger agenda that's going on at the moment, which revolves around devolution and around the shape and form of local government and its partners. That has overtaken the commissioning agenda, I think, in many respects, and will do so, and we risk being left behind. In terms of that, there are the other aspects of this, and I wish our administration had the imagination that you have articulated. I wish they had the point of view you've taken.
Is there a question?
There is, I'm getting there. You commented about having strong, robust processes, having strong, robust thinking. And the one piece of evidence that we have this evening, factual evidence, the survey that has been conducted by this Scrutiny Committee, shows that there is considerable question marks over that process along those lines. So can I ask you, in terms of your experience of taking this forward for us, how might we go about establishing those strong, robust arguments and processes about in-house delivery? Because that was discounted completely. It was the very first thing that was thrown out the door in COG 1 was the in-house delivery. That wasn't even considered. That for us is a problem. So from your experience, how do we go about enshrining that in what we do to give that an opportunity at least to be expressed? I really appreciate your view on that.
I don't think Rome was created overnight. Part of my observation is that I have other district and borough councils saying, if I go around the country, I know that Selby Borough Council is doing some things. What are they doing? They'll say to me, Oby and Wixton, I understand that they've been mentioned in the trade press. They're doing some interesting things kind of around this agenda. Newark and Sherwood, and then very quickly somebody might turn around and say, I understand that Basingstoke and Dean is doing something as well, but you're all doing different things. Yeah, but I think one thing that's emerging is actually that although you've got some questions about what you're doing, and it's absolutely right that you should have mixed views, questions, and you should hold this process to scrutiny, but I think that you've got to be persistent with it because, and again, I'm going to make a value judgment here, Councillor. I don't think we can carry on the way that we've done things in the past. We don't have the resources in local government to be able to do it. And I think that what we're actually involved in here is a process where we're learning how to do things better. I'm fully aware of the fact that some of these decisions that we make about do we make or buy something really are down to people's jobs, their livelihoods. It's about the image that the authority has got as well in terms of what you do. Because there are people out there who say, I pay a lot of council tax, I expect things for it, and I expect professionalism, I expect sound administration for what I've got. But we have got to think if there is somewhere, another way of doing things that is better or more efficient, these are the really difficult decisions that we can't shy away from in terms of what we're doing. It is very difficult. It is political with both a large P and a small p, but my commendation to you is the sense that you've started to try and do something different, and you've started to do it your way, not somebody else's way. Please be persistent. Keep stopping, learning from what you're doing, allow it to be in the public domain and open to public scrutiny, because that is everything that you should be doing. It is a democratic organisation at the end of the day. And I think that you should have the will perhaps to hold on to kind of what you've got in terms of the talent that you've got, because maybe one of the things that is not spoken about enough in local government is the sense that in the last 10 years we've lost an awful lot of talent out of local government, an awful lot of talent that we can ill afford to lose,
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I appreciate what you're saying. I just wish our administration was even close to the aspiration you set out, rather than a preconceived agenda.
Councillor Pearce, question please, no grandstanding.
I beg your pardon, did you accuse me of grandstanding? I hadn't even started.
No, I was implying that someone else might have been.
No, surely not, Chair. Well, I am going to say that it's interesting that we mentioned democracy. Some of you may already know that this is the 750th anniversary of the start of democracy in this country, with the first parliament sat in on the 20th of January 1465. That's my fun fact for the day. Yeah, it was. It was killed eventually, yes. Are you suggesting? No, you're not, no. You talked about examples of how it fails. And you talked about being able to provide a service in a different way, and I don't think any of us disagree with that. I think it is true that in the final analysis, cost is the most important issue that keeps coming back, and there have been massive cuts in all sorts of directions. But you know, the commissioning process, the externalization, the outsourcing, the privatization, whichever particular descriptive you choose, doesn't alter the fact that once it goes outside, you're not looking at a 2-year contract or a 3-year contract. You're looking at many, many more years than that. And the point I'm making, which I'm very interested in what you say about, is when you take what used to be known as public transport and accepted that it did provide a service for people in need, sadly, because of externalization and because of the depth to which that externalization penetrated society, it only serves the people who make sure the service runs at a profit. And, you know, the transport companies are, you know, it's fair enough, they openly say that's the case. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't continue to provide the transport in everywhere, if you like, except London, because it's in the Transport Act that dial-a-ride is continued. But everywhere else, there are issues over the inability of the general public to get from A to B in the way they used to. And I think that produces a fear. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to suppose that that fear is realistic, because once you externalize and it goes to a private company, the drivers for the delivery for that private company are frankly different.
Was that a question?
Yeah, I thought I said I was interested in our colleague's friend's view, Chair. Did I not say that? It was a question. I can talk to myself for a little longer.
Would you like to comment on that?
If we could respond. The risk of actually not wanting to kind of venture into polemic, I will speak in very general terms. I will say that one of the things that local government and the public services have been exceptionally weak on, I believe, in the last 20 years, is holding our contractors to account. We've been very poor at doing this. We've been also very poor at specifying exactly what will our contractors provide for us. And by being poor at specifying, sometimes we've over-specified what we want, down to the point where it's actually been so much detail in there. I will also accept the fact that there are a number of cases where private sector contractors have pulled the wool over the eyes, actually, of public sector clients. But I'm also of the view that there are many cases where private sector and commercial organisations have actually improved services significantly in terms of what we do. The evidence on that is pretty irrefutable these days. But I think it would be wrong just to focus actually on some specific issues in services, particularly around maybe the motives of individual bus drivers and bus companies. But I think that we've really got to think about our duty about holding our contractors to account. I just want to return to the point as well, when you're talking about kind of how we move towards long-term contracts. That is a worry of mine, what we call prime contracting, where we actually kind of find a contractor who say that for the sake of actually having a very loose contract, I will give you a contract for 10, 15, 20 years. And in the National Health Service, we've seen some contracts now actually over 30 years for people. And of course, people lose interest in providing over that particular period of time. You know, sometimes it's better to pay a slightly higher price and have a shorter term contract, because very often, sometimes a contract will lose interest towards the end of their contract. It's very much in their motive to actually kind of reduce their provision, reduce their overhead costs, because they're tendering for another one at the other end of the country. But for me, and again, the risk is about slightly polemic about this, we, and by we I mean all of local government, have been very weak in some cases in terms of holding our contractors to account. So I hope that in some way answers your question.
Thank you. Councillor Regan, then I've seen Councillor Kubitz, and one more questioner after that. Councillor Tate.
Yeah, just comment on what Councillor Pearce said before I ask questions. That I think you're referring to the Public Transport Act of 1985, which allowed devastation of our public transport system, actually, and it's still hurting us today. And it's one of my local beesmen on it. But surely that was part, and it feeds into what's happening now. It's an ideological drive over the last 30 years of neoliberalism, which really is to just slim down the size of the state, and that means local government as well, and to outsource as much as can be done possible. And I don't think it's everything to do about efficiency either. It's ideological, and obviously cutting public spending for local councils by 30% drives us towards actually going to the lowest common denominator. So I refute about it provides better service. Certainly in public transport it is not. And but I would also like to say, after 30 years of diminishing the state and demolishing it and actually running down public service, what does privatisation and the externalisation say about public service ethos?
Well, I think actually I would personally just like to refrain from comment on anything that may be regarded as ideological or political, because I just don't think I'm in a position to do that actually in this forum. But I would apologise if you thought I was referring to public transport specifically. I was talking in general terms actually around the performance actually of contractors, that there are innumerable examples actually of where kind of private sector contractors have actually improved services, and I will accept that there are kind of examples as well actually where private contractors have failed miserably actually in terms of what they've done, and they have pulled the wool over their eyes actually of public sector clients. But I think I would, Chairman, actually just refrain from actually entering into any debate about the ideological stance on this.
I understand. Honourable Kubit.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. You've talked very much in generalities, and of course the whole way through your presentation I'm thinking in the back of my head of very specific experiences that we've witnessed in performance panel of problems that have arisen due to references that you've made about contractors not being held to account, contractors putting the wool over the council's eyes, the council taking their eye off the ball. And I'm afraid I've seen so many since I've become a councillor that I'm really truly horrified by and I'm not criticising the council per se, well specifically, but there does seem to be a naivety in public sector when they engage with private sector that shocks me, in a way that in the private sector we're much more severe when somebody fails to deliver what we believe we bought, the service we believe we bought. So my question, I have a couple of questions, but you made a very specific, because you've talked in generalities, but you have made specific references to there being areas where there has been irrefutable amelioration and provision of services by going through the outcome-oriented method. And I would be truly grateful if you could cite those sectors that benefit more to these outcome-oriented methods than others, because Councillor Pearce is completely correct when he talks about the public transport system. And as a district council, we don't provide public transport, it's the county, but we've even had the county here and Stagecoach here to talk to us about it, and it's evident they cherry picked, and that's what private sector do, and that's what the private sector's done with the Royal Mail. And we can list numerous cases where this mix doesn't work because the boys with the divvies and the paychecks choose the best bits of the business and leave us with the rump, and then the vulnerable don't get the services they're supposed to get from a global provision of services. So which sectors has the University of Birmingham identified as those that truly, irrefutably in your words, are ameliorated by this methodology?
I think rather than kind of areas of provision, I think it's actually about specific instances in specific areas. I don't think there's any consistent pattern across service areas, and we know that kind of the children's services, protecting vulnerable families, adult services are struggling with it, but there are kind of some instances where by taking a more outcomes focused approach to it, that we're finding kind of new and imaginative ways of actually kind of dealing with services. And so I don't apologize for talking in kind of generalities, because I think it is difficult to actually raise specific instances, because I do run into the trap of saying, well, if it was good in place X and place Y, why isn't it actually good here? Because what we do know is that it's very difficult to replicate approaches from one place to another. It's not a transferable process. But if I can just give you one or two kind of little anecdotal stories about where it works very well. What we saw in Northamptonshire last year was that Northamptonshire is an interesting county in that it has got one of its towns is Corby. And anybody that's familiar with Corby knows that it was a steel town. It's the most predominant dialect spoken in Corby tends to be one which is centred around Motherwell, because large numbers of Scots kind of came down to Corby. It was known as being one of the hot spots in the country where it's got an unusually high incidence of alcohol-dependent young people. And again, I'm just trying not to make any value judgment about that with my remarks actually about the Scots, particularly having Scots ancestry myself. But they took a particularly imaginative approach to how they could deal with this. They looked at what is the outcome. They didn't want to have the output about reducing numbers of young people who are alcohol dependent. They said the outcome we want to look for is actually finding new opportunities for them to become functioning contributors to society. So an interesting partnership was set up between Corby College, between a number of the hospitality businesses that were growing around in Corby, and they actually gave opportunities for alcohol dependent young people to work in the hospitality business. Now that sounds absolutely bonkers at one level, but the fact was that when it was reviewed, the fact that trust had been placed actually in these young people, that there was a whole series of outcomes where a significant number of them went into further education, went into rehab voluntarily, and they also actually found some forms of employment that won't be used to them. So I think it was the idea that they looked at an outcome in terms of how do we actually make these young people functioning members of society, rather than just looking at the output about reducing the number of young people who are alcohol dependent. And again, I would just be reluctant to just say, don't think too much about the detail of that. It's the principle of the story there, that they actually looked at the outcome that they were looking at, rather than, if you like, the strong business case about what was the best way of dealing with it. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you for that. I mean, okay. I mean, I'd love you to say, yeah, X, Y, Z works well on. That's what I was looking for, obviously. But you made a reference to contractors pulling the wool over public sector's eyes, or that that relatively often we fail to hold the contractor, who happens to be a private contractor, to account. Has your university studies developed ways in which councils can try and increase the protection on those levels, so that you are less likely to have those going forward? And what are the main reasons why the public sector holds contractors less to account than private sector? I suppose that's a specific question.
Yeah. Again, actually that's a really excellent question, that is. What we do know is that there are a number of local authorities that are rethinking their whole approach to the way that they work with their contractors. by getting them to co-contract together, to work more closely with them. One of the things is to actually have more simplified specifications in terms of what they want, and actually involving the service users in the ongoing monitoring of the quality of service, where they report jointly to the contractor and to the client local authority in terms of what they do. Interestingly, I'm going up to Calderdale at the end of this week in West Yorkshire, where one of the things that's on the agenda there is looking at how they're rethinking their kind of their contractors panel, their contractors approach, and actually how they're working with them. And what they're talking about there is actually about how they can share the learning from the way that the services are actually developing. So I mean, this goes back to kind of the 1980s. There was the Egan report, which government commissioned in the 1980s, about saying why was so many central government construction contracts failing. And what John Egan came back with is saying it's down to relationships. It's down to relationships. You know, you've got to have an appropriate ethical relationship with your contractor, but you've got to have an element of open trust, where if the contractor feels they've got a problem with you as the client, because you're the proxy customer as the client, they can come back and give you early warning for it. Can we actually talk about how we can do this differently? And also, it's very much actually about the client, the local authority, being able to open the doors in a different way, to actually have a dialogue with them and say, look, we can't make promises about, you know, throwing more money at you, or, you know, reinvesting in you, or putting you in a better position when the contract comes up again to allow you to bid for it in a way. We can't do that, obviously, under the procurement regulations. But what we can do, we can actually have a dialogue about what we're doing. And I think that we've failed in many cases, actually, not to have that dialogue. We've had the false belief that where we're actually paying somebody to do something for us, we would let them get on and do it. But what we all know sitting around this table, if we had a builder coming in to do something in our own house with us, we'd be on their backs all the bloody time watching what the hell they were doing, you know. But I think this is what I'm getting at, and you know, I do appreciate I'm talking in general terms. There is a lot of evidence where local authorities have just actually said, we've given you the check, now get on with it, go and do it. Come back to us when the contract's finished and we'll re-let it. You know, it is about relational contracting, and I think we're learning that lesson very late in the day, Councillor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tate.
Thank you, Jim. From your presentation, you implied, and maybe I got it right, I'm wrong, is that we as a district council are relatively unusual at this stage in this type of work and what we're doing. And I wonder why, given that the methodology of this type of work is pretty well established in the commercial world, in business process re-engineering, why that having been around for quite a long time, that there are so few at the district council level who are undertaking this sort of work. And if you've got any comments to make on that.
Well, I think, Councillor Tate, first of all, I would say that I don't know. I would hesitate to quantify the number of English district and borough councils that are trying this, but I would be surprised if it's more than 20 at the moment. I know there's a lot that are thinking about it. I know I'm very close to my own district council where I live, and I know that they're 5 years behind you in the way that you're thinking with this. They purely see this agenda as something that goes on at county level, you know, that they're not involved in it. And the reasons they put forward for it is the sense that they don't have the resources, they don't have the mindset. I think they have the will to try and do something different, but I just don't think they know where the starting point is. So I think it's difficult to say actually how many local authorities are doing it, but all I can tell you to evidence that is that certainly in the last 12 months, you know, so when I've had people kind of either sitting in sessions that have been doing back at the university, or where we've actually been involved in kind of projects about researching kind of some of these issues, and we've actually kind of introduced the idea of what a borough and district council's actually doing in two-tier areas. Basingstoke and Dean has been mentioned quite a few times.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Briggs. It's been very useful, I think, to us. I'd be particularly grateful if, through our officers, you could let us know who you'd recommend as a reference site for doing the in-house bid well. And I think other members here would as well. But thank you for giving us your time. Now, we have in our papers the reports from the survey that this committee commissioned, and we're very much helped by Leslie in processing this. And I decided it was as well for us to look at these before we then come on to the Office of View. Welcome, Councillor Isaac. I was expecting Councillor Potter to be here, and was going to ask him to lead this this session, as he was the original designer of this questionnaire, subject to advice from other people. But my view is that the thing that stares out at me is the number of questions that indicate, particularly with regard to COG 1, which is the only one that's paid its way through, the number of questions on which people said that they didn't think it was fully explained to them what we were about, and that concerns me. And I'm sure that when Lisa talks to us with Simon, then that issue will be dealt with. Has anyone else got any flags coming out of the survey results they'd like to raise? Councillor Harvey and Councillor Pierce to follow.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's lots of flags that come out of this particular survey. If I'm being honest, read it in the way that it's presented in the report. And the first question I would ask is, why aren't the comments attached to it? Because the comments that were passed by people as part of this survey are as relevant and I think actually illuminating in a contextual sense that would be important to us, not just the statistics. The statistics speak themselves.
That was my decision after getting advice of various sorts on it, and I felt that there was a promise of confidentiality in the survey, and I became convinced that none of us would sufficiently understand the nuances to know which comments would identify the source, and so I decided it wouldn't be published with the agenda. The task group, myself and Councillor Potter, have seen them, and I'm sure other members have, but it wasn't appropriate in my view to bring that level of detail up at a meeting in public.
Well, I think those comments elucidate important pieces of evidence for any consideration of this entire item. The statistics themselves are there. I mean, that you can read the report in terms of both COG 1 and 2 and the particular grievances and issues and relevant points that are raised about the sessions themselves, the manner in which they were conducted, the evidence and the way that evidence was presented by people and the way it was handled, and the views that people take to the extent that they agreed the process was valid and the process was appropriate. They're all there. And I think rather than picking them out as a hodgepodge list, one by one, I would rather take the document as a survey and suggest that from that conclusions should be drawn that at the moment there is dissatisfaction with the way that the COG process has been conducted and run. I don't want the officers to justify that because I don't think that's appropriate for them to be put on the spot and now to have to justify the things they've done. That's inappropriate. I think constructively it is acknowledging what the survey is actually telling us, and if we want to be transparent and open as an administration and then as scrutiny, we should look constructively to how we can put this process right. And there are a number of recommendations that I would have that would lead from what we've been presented in the papers from. But I'd like to hear what other people say and other people think before I move a recommendation or a list that I've written. I might want to add to it before I get to the point of moving a recommendation, Chair. But I do have comments and a way forward that I think are clear from what we've been presented with.
That's fine. Anyone else on this specific topic? Councillor Tate.
Yes, Chairman. I can't specifically agree with the comment that that it's flawed because of the statistical evidence that's been presented in this report. Because if you look at the balance of the statistics, then the COG 1, which has an outcome, primarily or dominates some of the comments through the rest, which are no longer applicable because they haven't got to that level yet. And then if I look at the report from the officers, then there is a slightly different, because they have aggregated all the intelligence that's been created over the whole time of the cogs, and that comes to a completely different picture. So I can't agree that primarily by saying, okay, there is a set of data here that represents the whole cog process. I don't believe it does.
Sorry, Councillor Pitts.
That's okay. Yeah, I mean, I can understand this not representing the whole cog process. We're only looking at cog one, and therefore this is going to be quite an elongated piece of scrutiny, unless, of course, we stop the process. But, you know, the views that are drawn from this by the commissioning team conflicts with those from the survey. That is true. And if you look at page 30 of 150, I'll give that to you as a reference. It conflicts with our own questionnaire, which is summarised on pages 41 to 57. And that's a matter of discussion as well. But, you know, £750,000 to date is the cost of this exercise to ensure the services are delivered in a more efficient and appropriate way. I'm struggling a little bit with how far this snowball is going to go. You can highlight the inadequacies of COG 1 as well, because I think there were predetermined outcomes. That's my view. I think there was a lack of expertise of those involved, and I maintain that view particularly on COG 1. But let me tell you that I was at COG 3 last week, and I was sat on a table with one member of the community and 3 members of BBC staff. And I can't tell you who was on the other table. What I can tell you is that as the COGs have gone on, and transport is one that I can remember quite clearly, the decision makers have gone off. They're just not there. And the COG meeting that I attended last week was about making suggestions that would go forward into the report. And it seems pointless to me to undertake a study to critically examine things with our partners if they're not going to take part. It started with Mr. Dyer at the first one, then it got, in transport terms, Stagecoach, then it dropped to his OPPO, the operations manager, Mr. Vint, and so this time, which I don't know how many meetings it is, nobody from Stagecoach. And yet issues such as the suggestion that a hopper bus could be used to cover and block in some of the holes for people, that can't be discussed unless we provide it ourselves, because Stagecoach and Stagecoach's decision makers just weren't there. And that makes a mockery of the whole process. And I'm interested that we're leading the country again, and 5 years ahead of others. And, you know, our colleagues' views are academic, and they're very, very helpful. I'd like to see if we can locate an academic who believes the opposite to that, in fact, that in-house would be better. Last-minute adjustments made to the proposal last time, you know, within minutes of the scrutiny committee. And simply the process should be subjected to proper open discussion with those who know about the issues. And that means involving the decision makers, and it doesn't mean totally driven by cost, because that was said at the beginning of the culture COG. Oh no, it's not about cost, not about cost. And later on, it became apparently obvious because members of the council that were there, a member of the cabinet said, well, of course it's about cost. So, you know, I'm going to take some persuasion, and I'm able to say that because I have quite a large chunk of experience in the transport industry, because I've worked in many sectors of the transport industry for a number of years, and clearly I have experience in the theatre. So I believe that I can make those comments from I won't say a technically expert position, but with more of an expert position than we appear to want to involve.
Councillor James.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I'd start by, I think Councillor Tate mentioned the difference between the scrutiny's sort of questionnaire and the sort of the in-house questionnaire that existed previously. The comments in the in-house one that's in the main body of the report, of course, was after the session, and obviously the scrutiny one is after the event. And I think that's where, for me, the big disparity comes, because although post-session, people were saying, yes, that was a good session. I thought my points were covered. I thought people had listened to me. It was interesting. I learned new stuff. And we get those high satisfaction ratings. But those satisfaction ratings are with the session, not with the output. When we actually come to the output, which I think is question 14, do you think the process achieved what you originally thought it would, which is on page 54 of 146, the only one where there is a sort of almost an outcome, back to cog 1, and even the outcome is soft market testing, it's not actually an outcome as such yet. The number of people who are, yes, completely in agreement that the cog process achieved what they thought it would achieve was one. One person of all those surveyed said, yes, it completely addressed the issues and was what I signed up to. I mean, that's quite a concern, particularly when 12 people, which is getting on for 50%, or I think 42%, said it didn't at all achieve what they thought it would. And this is people who attended it. Now, the one who said yes might have been one of the commissioning team who attended that COG, I don't know. But it does seem to be that the outcome itself, the people who participated and gave their time to it, really don't feel that it got the outcome that they were expecting or wanted, and didn't feel their ideas were reflected in the outcome. And that's got to be a massive concern that comes out of this.
Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. In order to scrutinise effectively this kind of activity, it is critical on the one hand to have the strategy team's paperwork, and I do mean one page A4, by the way, going into a session, and the strategy team's response to the session. I'm not talking the strategy team, not the actual people who attended the session, have their one side of A4, these are where we're going next because of. The other thing that is key in my mind is that the commissioning strategy team should not be the team which exercises decision making about which option to include or exclude. Finally, the point I'd like to emphasize is that all of the options, after the exercises have been done, should be put before the relevant committee of the council for the councillors on that committee to make their decisions about which option is most effective or acceptable. They will, of course, be taking advice during that decision-making process as to cost and the effectiveness, etc. Now, if we can polish that approach and apply it effectively, I think we would be nearer getting to the point where the solution provided by commissioning may well be more acceptable to most people who are in the decision-making body, i.e. councillors in the whole of the council. But apart from that, I've got nothing to say. Thank you.
So could I interpret what you're saying as...
I'll interpret it. It's fine.
I'll finish my question. That if there was had been greater involvement of councillors in this, you would have more confidence in it.
That's not what I'm saying at all. Okay, so I'm glad you identify that. I'm very serious here. Including and involving external partners as part of the process, I think is essential. Right? So I'm not saying councillors have to be those people. Councillors should be involved, but at the moment there is an artificial limitation such that if I wanted to wake up one morning and decide, oh look, they're talking about the arts and culture, I fancy going along there, I'm not allowed. I'm not allowed because I didn't 6 months ago put my name down as wanting to be on it. Now, that is totally artificial, and it is totally unnecessary. And I've been here before. So I've actually walked into rooms to participate in a meeting and been told to go home. Tell you what, people don't usually say that to me. But it's a question of ensuring that if you see the commissioning strategy teams, part 1, session, part 2, session, part 3, session, if you see those decision-making processes identified by the commissioning strategy team, you end up understanding why they end up saying, well, there are 7 options and we now have to whittle them down. Well, I believe if they get to 7 options, they shouldn't be whittling them down. They should be giving them to us to whittle down. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tate.
Chair. I just wanted to respond to a comment which I keep hearing, and I don't quite agree with, frankly, which is that the end result of the commissioning process is predetermined. I've been involved with COG3, and I can see no evidence that, to me, which says the process has got a predetermined end. And I keep hearing this being said, but I don't hear and see any evidence being produced in any documentation which says this is the outcome that has already been predetermined. So if we're going to carry on making that statement, I really would like to see what the evidence is, not the anecdotal which says I think it is. It is what is the evidence which says this is the end result that we want to get to.
Gavin James.
Yes, it's not a specific response to that point. It builds on what Councillor Keating was saying. If we go back to COG 1, by the time we as councillors were presented with a paper, we had a paper and in it said, carry on as is, ruled out. The internal trading account, ruled out. And these were things that before we've even done soft market testing, we had ruled out written. That would suggest that before councillors got their mitts on it, some things had been predetermined as not possible, and all the reports that relate to those had not been included. I think our expectation was we would come back with in-house is one option, but here are the drawbacks, here are the possible benefits of it, that the internal trading account has been explored, here are the positives, here are the risks involved with it, and then soft market testing, we are aware that some agencies operate in this area, other councils have used them, so we don't adjourn off for soft market testing to come back 3 months down the line, possibly, and this is where we get to the embarrassing bit, is we're now going to do soft market testing. If no one's interested in the private sector or voluntary sector in taking over those services, we have to go back to one of those ideas which we've already stamped rejected on and go, yeah, actually we'll look at that now because it's one of the only options on the table. What should have come to the table were, these are the options that are realistic, and we appreciate the completely bizarre has to come out, but these are the realistic options. Then councillors can sit, they can discuss, they can debate, and from that discussion in the current process, the portfolio holder can sit there, watch that debate and discussion, and then obviously recommend to his cabinet colleagues what was the most appropriate. I think the thing that hurt and set the concern about predetermination off was the fact that those in-house options had had rejected stamps before we had an alternative to them. And that was the weakness. So that's why people say predetermined, because in the one report we had, we'd ruled out in-house, we'd ruled out internal trading account, and we were going soft market testing. So we'd ruled out the in-house options before we even knew whether we had an outside option. That seems very much like predetermination. That's why we get concerned, because all options should have been open so we could pick the best, rather than just pick, in the end we picked not an option, we picked let's look for something else.
I was supposed to be discussing the results of the survey of COG members. I think it's probably time to ask the head of commissioning to speak to us, but I've seen Councillor Pearce and Councillor Harvey. Do you wish to say more on the topic of the survey of members of the COGs?
For the record, Chair, if you go to page 11 of the questionnaire, question 5, I think the statistics are pretty conclusive in terms of those people in COG 1 and 2, and I will concentrate on COG 1 and 2 rather than 3 and 4 for reasons that the officers have expressed. But look at the statistics there. I either tend to disagree or strongly disagree with the statement made in question 5, running at 65%. Let's continue the theme, shall we? Go to the next question. Do you agree there's been sufficient evidence expressed? Again, we're running at 67 or 70% who tend to disagree or strongly disagree. If we go over the page to page 51, we've got 75 and 78% of people on question 9 do not believe there's been innovative approaches of service delivery have been explored, even a little. And I could go on and on and on at those percentages, at those levels, through the questionnaire. It raises questions that relate to the comments, that relate to the points that have been raised, that the people who took part in the COG 1 and COG 2 do not have confidence in the process they have been through, let alone the fact they haven't even been consulted in COG 1 on the conclusions that were drawn. So there are pretty big questions. We haven't discussed that bit yet, but if we're going to talk about the validity of this survey, I think the survey and what it shows us is pretty clear, and it gives us a direction to travel if we wish to be transparent and we wish to appreciate it. Otherwise, we're just literally thumbing our nose at all those organisations and people that took part in the process, and that would be rude and utterly arrogant of us to do so.
Councillor Pearce, do you want to add something on the survey?
Yeah, I think that I endorse what my colleagues on either side of me have said. And I think that my position on predetermination, I can outline because I was there and heard it, where initially it wasn't going to be about costs. This is not about costs. And then about session 5 or session 6, the cabinet members said, well, of course it's about costs. So, you know, I don't know whether that's evidence or not, but that's what I heard.
Well, the cabinet member's here, and I'm going to ask Councillor Isaac to speak now.
Good evening, Scrutiny. Council approved commissioning in 2012. Just to remind everyone, commissioning is about getting the right things done in the right way at the right time for the right price. It's about outcomes. By deciding to commission services, Basingstoke Council is engaged in innovative work as a borough council in UK terms, as we've heard from Ian Briggs. And this underscores the importance of learning from our initial work. I was interested to hear Mr. Briggs's comments about the fact that councils can't carry on in the way they've been used to carrying on, and that we have to look at operating more efficiently and more effectively. And that's what this is all about. I welcome this Scrutiny Committee review and look forward to hearing its constructive comments on the commissioning process. At least I hope for that. I'm obviously disappointed with some of the comments that I've already heard this evening, which are really a parody of what took place in the commissioning process. But probably, if you understand that they come from people who really want to destroy commissioning, so we can't expect anything in the way of a balanced opinion from them.
Point of order.
Sorry.
Which standing order?
I have no idea which order it is, but you said earlier, any more comments on the, and don't grandstand, and any more comments on the survey. This is not a comment on the survey. And I suggest it's ruled out of order, Chair.
I did say that it was time to move on to presentation from the head of commissioning. In fact, as the cabinet member for commissioning wishes to lead on it, it was a perfectly logical step forward, I think, Councillor Pearce. And I think we should now listen to him because he's been listening to us.
Thank you, Chair. This review by the Scrutiny Committee comes at an important stage in commissioning following completion of the first COG and with 3 others at different stages in their process. It is necessary to review what has occurred and to analyse our successes and where things can be improved. It would be surprising indeed with an entirely new process if there was not scope for improvements to be made in our processes. The commissioning strategy team has been working on these in advance of this meeting, incorporating these into COGs 2, 3 and 4 on homelessness, public transport and antisocial behaviour respectively. We've also been cognizant of comments made by some COG members in response to Scrutiny's own survey. My perspectives so far as Cabinet member responsible for commissioning include acknowledgement and praise for those members of our community who have given their time and expertise to
the cogs. I think Councillor Keating's absolutely right. We should be involving our. Okay, sorry, Councillor Keating. I'll just make this one. I got two others I was going to make, but I won't do. It is important that we involve external partners in deciding things like how we allocate our grants and how we might improve better the investments we do make in things like public transport. We do, as Mr. Briggs said, need to get away from the sort of council silo-orientated approach. I've also been struck by the creative ideas and the creative debate and new ideas engendered by the cogs. I think overall it's been an open and transparent process, certainly in comparison with the ways things used to be done in relation to Cog 1 and the arts and culture grants. I think I've been impressed by the challenge to existing ways of doing things and the new ideas that have emerged through the cogs. As Mr. Briggs said, I think it's been a fertile laboratory for ideas. It also occurs to me that there's been a lasting impact of these ideas that have come from the cogs in terms of the changes now being brought forward to arts and culture in the borough through the first cog. I'm confident that without commissioning and the cog, these improvements would not have emerged, certainly not through the old established pre-commissioning process. Finally, commissioning has galvanised the arts and culture organisations to examine how they operate in meeting residents' needs and providing value for money. Yes, providing value for money. But of course, costs were an integral part of what we were looking at. There's more work to be done, including market testing. But I've been impressed by the way that many of our leading organisations are responding and seeking to become less dependent on grants from the borough in return for receiving for the first time longer term, more secure funding. To conclude, Chair, I look forward to hearing further the Scrutiny Committee's comments.
Thank you. Now I'm going to ask the Head of Commissioning to give us preliminary observations.
Thank you, Chair. Before starting on the presentation this evening, members, it might be helpful just to address a couple of the issues that have been raised tonight. And one of them is indeed a debate that the commissioning strategy team and I had around the soft market testing, Councillor James, and about actually when's the right time for that. And there were three reasons why the recommendation from Councillor Isa as portfolio holder was to undertake the soft market testing. And that's because I don't think as a team we could have gone out to the market and said, by the way, we're looking at outsourcing our events team, we're looking at soft market testing one of our flagship buildings that we own, without actually member endorsement for that. Because I think if you'd have found out that we were doing that, I think that would have caused a problem. So we felt it was right and appropriate to come to members to say, is this something that you want us to do? And there were another two reasons why that. It's, and we took our procurement team's advice on this. If you go out to the market too many times to soft market test and don't do anything at the end of it, you can be accused of teasing the market. And once you have a reputation of doing that, it means that people don't come to the table when you then send out those soft market testing documents. So we were quite mindful of that as well. It's also an issue around timing, and I think Ian Briggs mentioned this earlier. Whilst benchmarking has illustrated to us that there are markets elsewhere in the country that began at various different times, whether 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and those models have worked, what we need to find out is, can it work for Basingstoke and can it work in 2015? And absolutely, the answer to that might be no. But until we go out to the market, we don't know that. So that's just a few comments on the soft market testing.
Point of clarification, I was named.
Okay.
The point you said is you didn't want to go out without councillor's authority to speak to the outside sectors, obviously voluntary sectors or businesses. Obviously, you're not going out with we are looking at outsourcing, because of course that's very early in the COG process. We are looking at alternative ways of delivery and to compare it against what we've got. Then you can invite people in the industry, not wearing their company hat and to make specific quotes in the COG, but they could have been involved in the COG process to listen to what the thoughts were, to listen to what the ideas were, to come in as local partners or potential partners. We're not promising anything. We just ask them to come in and get involved in the process, because a lot of the time the innovation may have come from them in the first instance. I just think it's really sad to get to the end of a process and still not, and then go soft market testing. The fact that business doesn't like being teased, I think business has to get used to the idea that we will look at all our options, and if they come up with an option that isn't as good as what we've already got, or not as good as something else someone else can provide, then it doesn't get it. But they're local residents as well. They're part of the community. Business always say they want to be part of the community. They should be part of this community in developing, whether it's arts and culture or buses or anything else. And in terms of the can't work here or now, by having local providers involved in the COG process, we know whether or not it can work here and now. What we don't have is that delay afterwards, which we've got now. So I just want to clarify that.
Chair, I'll try to avoid naming any members in future, because otherwise we could be here quite a long time. You know, I accept some of those points, but actually the people we had in the COG, you know, we invited a wide range of partners to the COG. We already know, and it's public information, I think members of Scrutiny Committee were contacted. The only people in the room for the COGs that were interested in some of the events is Destination Basingstoke. There is a far wider market for events, and what happens when you do a soft market test is that it goes on a portal and it registers interest, so anyone within that industry will be able to pick that up. And you know, a few phone calls of people that have made contact with us interested in various options that have come out of COG1, so I'm not specifically talking about one or the other, have come from far and wide. So geographically it's not that they're necessarily local, and some of them might pick up, you know, I don't think it's an endless invitation list to a COG process. Just moving on, Chair, if I may. When we started the process, we went to group leaders about how best to engage with members and how to get members onto the COGs, and we agreed that we would go to the group leaders and that they would arrange nominations from their group. If members tonight want to tell us that that hasn't worked, or there is a different and better way of doing this, we'd be very happy to hear that. No councillor that has ever turned up to a COG meeting has been turned away because we didn't know they were coming. And I've actually got an example where 4 members turned up at a COG session that we weren't expecting to turn up, and we welcomed them, got them their labels, sat them on tables, and that was accommodated. We would never want to turn anyone away from a COG session, Chair. A really important point for me, just to make, the commissioning strategy team and I did not complete the commissioning survey, and that's just something that I think is an important point to make, Chair. And certainly in terms of the team exercising decision making about what options it or in and out, the commitment from my team has always been to present all the options that came out of the COG, and certainly all those options were presented to the portfolio holder, because it was the COG that was acting in an advisory capacity to him, so there was no decision making made at our level in terms of what options were in or out. The final point, Chair, you've got the briefing note that out. There's a financial section on the briefing note that members would have read. The £750,000 on commissioning to date isn't accurate. We don't just do commissioning outcome groups. There's a far wider remit in terms of grant funding, percent for work, and supporting and advising other teams in the council around areas that aren't being dealt with in commissioning outcome groups. For example, we did a lot of work with Fairfields and Proteus around that. We helped with the insourcing of the dog warden service. That was previously a contract that was out. They came to us advice about different models they could look at, and actually that was something that was brought back in-house because it was actually seen more financially viable that way. We also deal with the percent for art contributions through Section 106 agreements. So when planning permissions are granted, many members in the room will be aware of the increase in planning appeals, and it's that team that provide witness statements and appear at planning inquiries in those areas. The figure we've given in the report, it was the best that we could do for members. I hope it's helpful. We were able to quantify the amount of time the team had spent preparing, attending and writing up the COG sessions for COG 1, 2, 3 and 4 between January and August of last year, and that was in the region of about £80,000.
Can we move on now to your presentation, Lisa?
Yes. Okay, members, you've seen in your pages that we sent out considerations that the team and I have had around 3 areas. So we've got immediate key messages on the process from the COG. So these are things that we've picked up through our evaluations and things that the team have picked up through being in those sessions. Because obviously there are a lot of conversations and networking that happens at those COG sessions. We've also had a really good look at the scrutiny questionnaire and areas highlighted there. And then also we've been through the democratic process. You know, we've been through CEP, we've been to Cabinet, we've had the calling in scrutiny committee. So we've taken on board some of those comments. I won't go through all of this, Chair, point by point. Just to say that the major shift of the process moving forwards is to move away from 6 sessions over 6 months of an hour and a half long and moving to 2 full days, no more than 6 weeks apart. We feel this gives a longer amount of time to focus on those exercise briefs during that day. A lot of our COG members have said how much they value the networking opportunity that they have in those COGs, and we think a full day allows them to really take advantage of that. And this also will speed the process up in terms of, instead of it being 6 months, we're looking at a much shorter period of around 2 months. Responding to what we've heard from councillors, that there are councillors who are precluded from coming to the COGs because they are running during the day. What we intend to do for every session that is run during the day, what I would call a normal COG session, we will replicate that into a shorter session for members on an evening of around an hour and a half to 2 hours long, depending on how many exercises we're running at that session. But this is the current process. So this is showing you the 6 sessions that we currently do over the 6-month period. And the next slide demonstrates what we'd be looking at, what we're proposing to move to. So you have a session A and session B. They're held during the day for COG members. And then we have a session A, session B member workshop that's run in the evening. So that allows members to be involved if they want to be. I'm going to pass over to Simon now just to go through, and we've introduced this concept of working groups, and really what we're trying to do there is respond to the comments that we've had that the COG's kind of finished. There was a period of time where nothing appeared to be happening, and then a report, there was a report. So Simon will talk to you a bit about the working groups that we've already put into action in COG 2 around homelessness.
As Lisa has mentioned, in order to continue that engagement with COG members, after those initial sessions have taken place, 6 working groups have been established and are coordinated by the Commissioning Strategy team. Now, these sessions either take place online, through email, or through informal working groups and meetings. We've split these working groups by the areas in which the COG has made its initial suggestions, and where it has done that initial bit of service design at session E, and we've grouped all of those comments together and put them under an area of work. And as you can see here, again, I won't go through all of them, but we've taken a different approach depending on the size and scale of those options. So the early education and training, which was one of the suggestions coming out of COG 2 about life skills, has been developed internally by the Commissioning Strategy team using all of the information we've got from the commissioning process, but is now being tested externally with some of those COG members. A different version of the way that's working would be options for temporary accommodation that are suitable and value for money. This is currently being developed by an external housing specialist, because that's where our housing team have suggested that they've worked with somebody on a historic basis that's got a lot of knowledge in this area, and actually some of the comments that they've made are very similar to some of the recent suggestions by local sort of partnership groups. So that's being developed by an external housing specialist, and then will be tested with the COG members again. And we're doing that in order to try and enable COG members to join up those dots really between those COG sessions and to what eventually is presented in the Delivering Future Outcomes document, which is really highlighting how we achieve the outcomes that have been defined at the beginning of the session.
Microphone. Thanks, Simon. Moving on to what was highlighted in the scrutiny questionnaire, I think the really clear message to us as a team is about being much clearer to everyone, and I think particularly councillors, about what we've done and how we've got there. So we've very much taken that on board in all the points that we're looking at how we work up our reports to you in the future. This also comes through from the democratic process as well. There's a new option here. It's the top option on the possible ways forward. We've thought of this after the papers were published. But we think that earlier engagement, and I think actually this has come out from some comments from members already, but earlier engagement with the policy committee after the end of the commissioning outcome group, with more time before it then goes on to cabinet. I think we felt with the COG1 report, we did the usual take it to a policy committee, take it to cabinet without that breathing space in between. So what we're looking at doing is having that earlier engagement with policy committee and not then booking on the immediate next cabinet, so we can consider those points, do some more legwork and put that into the report. So that's a new option there. Happy to hear what members think of that this evening. Moving on about how we're going to present the information, we looked at other models out there about presenting information, and there's a 5-case model which is a best practice standard recommended by HM Treasury. We've looked at this, we think it works, and Simon will just take you through a little bit more about that.
We're trying to use the work from those working groups that we've just talked you through for COG2, 3 and 4 to inform this 5-case model, and we're looking at the very beginning of this 5-case model in terms of developing an outline business case that can be discussed by the relevant policy committee. And the purpose of an outline business case is to agree the strategic context of the proposal and suggestions from the COG and make a robust case for change, providing members with an early indication of a preferred way forward, not the preferred option. So the outline business case and now allows for the evaluation of all the different variations of individual options, and this covers scope, so the levels of functionality of a service, benefits and risks, how the service could be delivered, who could deliver the service, how quickly we want that service to change and the speed of which those options could be implemented, and how the options could be funded. And along with some narrative, all of these evaluations that have taken place as part of those working groups will be demonstrated, for example, in the table that's on the slide now. And each one of those options is evaluated against the outcomes that are established by the COG and also some critical success factors. And an example of a critical success factor could be how well the option fits a council plan or strategic priority. And essentially what this allows us to do is it results in the identification of a short list of options and shows members how those working groups have ended up at that preferred way forward, which I think is what we've been hearing today in terms of some of the working behind that evaluation that takes place after those initial COG sessions.
Members, that's the presentation this evening. I hope it's helpful. We're happy to take any questions and welcome feedback on any or all of these options.
I have to say that Vice Chairman and I thought we'd seen the presentation, but this is new to us, as well as the other members. And I feel inclined to say we should set up another task group to look at this and come back to scrutiny. But Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry I was late tonight, but my car broke down the A33, and I've obviously missed a short part of the introduction into this. However, I'd like to take something up that we just heard from the commissioning team, in case I missed something important. I don't want to ask a question that's already been answered. These working groups, you said, were conducted on an email basis. Occasionally you have got people in physically to have a chat. How transparent is that? Or are we waiting for the end of the conclusion of those working groups before members actually get to see what they've done, basing their work on the outcome of the COGS, I understand?
So, as part of the commissioning process, obviously the members that have been involved or would like to be involved in those working groups can be throughout that process, so they can continue to sit on those working groups and take part in that evaluation. The comments that we receive back via email, so for example, the early education and training one, we've sent out the business case with an attached sort of brief questionnaire with it, 5-6 questions about how they feel about the different permutations and variations of that, the evaluation of that option, and that will all be available within the full Delivering Future Outcomes document. There's probably part of an appendices that goes with that.
What I'm kind of interested in, as I think most of the members in this room are interested in, is how's this process going? I'm not been involved in the COGS, but there's certainly one or two points that those working groups are addressing I'm very interested in. It's the first I've heard of them, by the way, and the subject matter. Now, how do we engage with this? Because I'm not sure if any of the members around the table are part of the working groups. No. So that's why I'm asking the question.
Yep, thank you, Councillor Miller. So the working groups, in terms of COG 1 and some of the criticisms around what happened, so the COG sessions finished. The commissioning strategy team did a lot of legwork around benchmarking, viability and corporate implications. And it was that information that then was a surprise to the COG members. They hadn't been part of that. So the working groups are just to really correct that and for them to be a part of pulling all the information together that goes in the Delivering Future Outcomes document. So it's getting to the same endpoint as COG 1, it's just involving the COG members, whether they're councillors, external stakeholders or members of staff. So they're all involved in those working groups, and it means that we're taking them with us along the journey. So when the report is published for CEP or EPH, whichever is the most relevant policy committee, there's no surprises in that document, and that's what we're putting right. So it's not, we're getting to the same endpoint, it's just about their involvement in how we produce that document at the end and involving them.
Councillor Tate.
Thanks. Just a question. I understand what in regard to the questionnaire that you're trying to provide a balance between those that can attend the COG meetings and those that can't, and putting an evening session together. I don't quite understand how that's going to work, because one of the benefits of being involved with the COG is the work within the process, and the interaction between everybody provides a very neutral way of going forward. And similarly, by having a secondary meeting which is councillor based, you're going to lose that type of interaction, and at the same time is the information that the councillor type of meeting is going to be working with is going to be fairly limited, because it won't have any background to what's actually going on in the COG. Now, I don't quite understand how that's actually really going to provide any better benefits where we are today.
Hopefully, Councillor, I can help you with that. We did think about, okay, what happens if we moved all the COG sessions to the evening? But if you think a lot of our external stakeholders, it's part of their role, their 9-to-5 job. So we're trying to strike that balance again. And we have heard from a lot of members that they haven't been able to attend the day session. The aim of the evening session, yes, it is going to be just members. It won't be on the same evening that we've had on the COG day, because what we will do as a team is look at the information and exercises, and we'll display that around the room. So you will be able to say for example, it's one of our probably infamous post-it note exercises. Those boards will be up. You will see what post-it notes other people have put up. If we need to type something up to make it easier for you to see, we'll type those things up. But it means that you can add post-it notes like you would have been if you were in the room. Yes, you don't have the benefit of the conversation around the table and some of that expertise. I absolutely accept that. And what I would really hope from this is that we get the balance of members that are still able to come to the day, that have the benefit of working on those tables, whether with staff and external providers, but also those members that really wanted to be there, having the opportunity to still put their comments against the exercises.
Thank you, Chair. The working group, Lisa, didn't happen for COG 1. Right, that's what I thought. Okay, thank you. Just another question on, you talked about, I think Simon was talking about the housing issue and referring a particular topic out to an external, either organisation or individual. Sorry? Temporary accommodation, thank you. Were the events team consulted in that way for the first COG, for them to recommend?
Councillor Pearce, when you said were there working groups, and I immediately said no, there were no formal working groups. But what I should have said is, but there were work with some of the teams, and the events team is one of the ones I would have mentioned. So there was work done with some establishing some of the benchmarking, some of the facts around the anvil, and there was also work with the events team around. They were concerned that there wasn't an internal model, there wasn't an opportunity for them to table what they thought they could do with the service. And therefore, what we did is have meetings with them, and I accept that we were challenging, the team were challenging with the events team in terms of saying, well, how does that deliver value for money? How is that an improvement on what we already do? Why can't this model do that? And it was through that we came up with the trading arm, because it's the commissioning strategy team that have that knowledge and expertise around alternative models and how those structures can work. And it was the events team that had their ideas around, well, we could do that if we weren't constrained by council processes and policies. And so that's what we said, well, that's a trading arm. We let them know how that worked, and that was what was fed into the work that the events team did.
It's a slight supplementary. We have seen some slides that weren't on the agenda. And I tend to agree with the chair that they need further consideration. I can't read them from here. I doubt anybody can. Is that okay?
Okay, I can't read them from here.
Chair, I mean, apologies if councillors can't do this. What we did, we were obviously under a very tight deadline. I think it was something like the 6th of January that we had to get these slides into you. So we wanted you to see the really pertinent points about this is what we do now. These are ways that we can address that. All we've done in adding to them is give you a slide illustrating the point. So the 2 slides on the process was just a visual of what's already written on the page before. The COG2 homelessness working groups was just to let you know this is actually what it had looked like in real life when we've tried the working group approach for COG2. And the 5-case model was just showing you there's a lot of points, aren't there, of possible ways forward about us wanting to be clearer and how we can present that information. So we've been looking at alternative models. We found this one, so literally just wanted to give you a slide of what that actually looked like. It wasn't meant to mislead members or be confusing. I'd be happy to circulate them to all of you, Chair.
Chair, it wasn't a complaint at all. I just hadn't seen them and I couldn't read them. So yes, I would like to see them. Then we'd decide whether we need to discuss them further.
Rob Golding.
Yes, sorry, Chair, were you after questions now, or are we into debate?
I don't think we're near a debate, no.
In that case, I'll wait.
But nobody else seems to be particularly constrained by that detail.
Which would you like me to do, debate or wait?
No, I think ask questions, I think.
Okay, I'll pass on the question.
Or hold your peace. Honourable Cubitt.
I'm going to seize the moment. Basically, firstly, I can't get over how accommodating you've been, and what seems to be really very thorough work on a new system. And the purpose of scrutiny is to be the critical friend. And my only major observation, well, it is actually, it's our sole raison d'etre as per the construct, is to be the critical friend to the cabinet and to the administration. And my only comment is that it seems to me that you're almost being too accommodating. That's my observation. I would think that whilst it's wonderful to offer the night sessions, we have political parties here, and there are peoples within all of the political parties here who have particular interests in certain areas that you're dealing with. And I would have thought it'd be far more fruitful for those political parties who know whom within their group has specific interest in homelessness or arts and leisure to feed that back to the group, and I wouldn't replicate the evening personally. And if members have specific interest, they can always read and dialogue with their appointed members that attend the COG, and that would be a much more sensible way of using council resources. That's my first comment. My second comment is I sense this unease and unhappiness from various members here in terms of the debate we've had on predetermination, which has been dealt with to a degree. But what I would like to know from the members who seem to be annoyed with the process is I haven't heard much constructive, critical friend advice on how else to do what you're doing, because I can't get over how accommodating you're being already.
I've said in the past, of course, to be a critical friend, it takes two to make friends. Gavin James.
Thank you, Chair. There's a few comments I'd like to make about lots of that. I will just pick up on Councillor Cubitt's point about the evening session. We've already done the town centre, nighttime violence, crime in the town centre at night. As a ward member who covers the town centre, who knows an awful lot about crime and works it full time for a living, I could have made a massive contribution, but unfortunately I was working in the magistrates' court at the time and couldn't. I was making my contribution in other ways. That's why it's important there is that access for councillors in the evening, because some of us work during the day and can't always make it. I think the thing I wanted to say first of all is this document, the one that you flashed up on the slides, I read through that. I thought that was fantastic. I thought that really did a very good job of addressing all the concerns that I'd had with a lot of what's going on. The little slides that flashed up in between, I'd have to read more carefully, but I thought this was very good. And I think the process is already improved massively by looking at those things. The only thing I did have a concern with, your slide up there, the one that's right on the screen now, there is I know that's just an example of how it works, but where you've got S1, status quo, discount, that can never happen, because status quo must always be an option, because you don't change unless you're changing for a good reason, because something's going to be a better service for the same money or more efficient. So the comparison, the benchmark is, what have we got now? So whenever anything comes before a committee, not even the portfolio holder can do it. You cannot rule out what we've got, because what you want to do is make sure that you're going to change for something better. So if we make that clear on every report, what we've got now has to be an option. It cannot be taken off the table, because that's the benchmark. What you're putting before us as alternatives, if it's not as good as what we got, we stick with what we got.
Apologies, Councillor James. I should have been more specific around the identification of the short list of options. What the short list of options always considers when presented back to a policy committee, or what it always will consider when presented back, is the status quo, the preferred way forward, and a do maximum. So what's the enhanced version of the preferred way forward, and a do minimum? So what's a slightly disenhanced version of the preferred way forward? So it will always include that option of the status quo, a preferred way forward, and the two different.
Now I'm going to speak. The Constitutional Working Party insists that this committee is only supposed to look backwards. And I'm not interested in chairing a committee that just looks backwards. we are never, as far as I can see, going to resolve the issue of predetermination. I have to say the allegation came in writing from a lot of participants in the arts and crafts COG and from councillors and so on and so forth. It's completely denied. There isn't any way we're going to resolve that now. But the way going forward, I think, is somebody used the word transparency, which I don't like very much. And I agree with Councillor Cubitt that what's being described to us is a way of enabling councillors to see what's really going on. Now, in this terms of nominations from the group leaders, incidentally, there's no reference to the group leaders meeting in the Constitution. I understood that it was one member from each group. And I thought I was going to have to fight Steve Day for the seat on Arts and Culture, but we both turned up at one meeting. And so there has been misunderstanding throughout. And I also am very concerned that there might be misunderstanding on the involvement of officers. And we need to be very, very clear about both of those cases. I believe that what's being suggested is firstly a way so that more councillors can take part, which is the evening meetings, more opportunities for members of the COG, including those councillors, to see what's going on and to take part in it, and gates through which the process is going to pass, which councillors will be involved, more sort of stop points. All of that seems to me to be a very constructive answer to some of the criticisms, including the predetermination. So I mean, I would be prepared to say that we'd like to see it more specifically, but all councillors are welcome, we've been told. We did discuss this proposition at our pre-meeting, and Lisa was unhappy with the idea that the working groups could consist of councillors who haven't taken any part before then. I think that's fair. If you're really interested in arts and culture, then you should latch onto this process as early as you can, and even if you can't attend every meeting. But it didn't come out in the report, but certainly the signatories and the chair and vice chair at the call-in were very concerned that it wasn't visible and understandable to us what had happened between the end of the COG and the proposal to the committee. And if we are, as councillors, going to be enabled to be seeing that, having seen what went on that far, I think that's a significant step forward. Now, this doesn't answer anything if people object to commissioning altogether, and I've indicated my view that we must really press to have the in-house option properly ventilated in each case. But I do think that the proposition that's in front of us, if it's now documented a bit more, it is a useful way forward. And so what I would like to suggest that we do set up from this committee a small task group to, in a sense, explain to the officers how we would like to see the thing documented, so it's absolutely clear and transparent to the way things are to go forward. Does any got an opinion on that? Councillor Miller?
Thank you, Chair. You're back to my favourite subject, which is process. And that's what this is all about. I know Councillor Keating will have a chuckle, but I've been hearing a lot of very familiar phrases coming from the commissioning officers here. And yes, I agree with Councillor James. You always have the status quo. You got to, because that is your benchmark. But I also observed both Lisa and Simon writing furiously. That's the point of the Scrutiny Committee. What we're doing is we're looking at a process which is the first kind of exercise that this council and probably most councils in the UK have ever experienced. It's a change from the norm because we want to be better. We want to be better for our residents and better for the balance sheet as well. You've got to look for the best outcome, whatever that may be. But this is a learning exercise you've heard all the observations that I've heard since I arrived tonight, that everything improves. And so the process is improving from all the comments from around this table, everybody. They are there to make observations of people with concerns. There have been some constructive criticisms, not many, but I think some of the observations will actually lend themselves to constructive, positive outcomes in the process. And that's what we've got to come to, which I think, as Chair, is what you're alluding to. How we get there, I think, is being taken on board by the officers tonight. Certainly, I thoroughly agree with your last comments, Chairman, and with Councillor Cubitt's comments earlier on. That's the positive way that we should move forward, because it'll improve this process and it'll improve the outcomes at the end of the day. And yes, the transparency is a word you can knock around, but it needs to be visible. If we suddenly waited until those working party reports hit the desk, it's very cold. You're looking at a piece of paper for the very first time, and it's difficult to look in what's behind it to eventually come out with the recommendations that the policy committees, and you've got the two chairmen sitting here tonight, will pass on to the decision makers within the council, and ultimately to all of us when we sit in the council chamber. So I think everything I've heard tonight will end up with a positive outcome from this evening, but we're learning. Don't disregard the COG process. It's a process. It's a process that a lot of people are looking at Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council. If it's thrown out of hand without a proper argument and without giving it a real try, I think people will look at Basingstoke and Dean and think we've got some people that have got a head in a bucket, and they're not prepared to listen and they're not prepared to experiment. We've got a chance to do this. We spent a year on it. I think it's a wonderful investment of the time involving us. We're getting a better understanding of it. And I think, Chair, your idea of a task group, it may only be 2 or 3 of us. Doesn't matter. But just a small, concentrated effort. And I don't mind getting involved in that. I think it's a good idea to move this forward. Thank you.
Well, since Councillor Miller used the words process and visibility, I would endorse him being a part of this. I would suggest we're now in debate, because I've made a proposal of the way forward, and the way forward I'm proposing is not that we're critical anything at this stage. What we are is participants in process improvements. So keep it.
Just one final comment, which is that I've said that I can't get over how much work you've done on the commissioning front, but having experienced problems at the other end, we've got to make sure that we have an owner post-commissioning that ensures that we don't have the wool pulled over our eyes by contractors, or that we're naive, or that so I don't know where that fits into this whole equation, but we could have a wonderful process, as one of the members said, but who's the parent of the baby once the baby's been delivered, and how can we make sure that whomever is the parent has total responsibility for any cock-ups post-commissioning, because that's the biggest issue, is accountability. And then the issues that we've come across, and there's been too numerous to mention, and they're pretty horrific, some of them, there's been no parent ownership of major screw-ups that have resulted in really horrific costs to our taxpayer in Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council.
Lisa.
Councillor Cubitt, so I'm the head of service, also responsible for our procurement and contracts team. So historically, procurement and contracts have sat in 2 separate places. And what we looked at is when you procure something, so when you set up a specification, when that provider comes in and promises X, Y, and Z, it's the procurement team that hears what they say they're going to deliver. That then would get handed over to someone who managed the contract that hasn't heard any of this, and it gets passed over, and already you've lost that link. So what we did in the commissioning strategy team and within the business unit was we, under a business unit review that I undertook last year, we've brought the procurement side and the contract side together. So they're procurement and contract officers. It means that those that were involved in the specification stage that hear all of that are then also involved in the contract management. What we've also done is there's a few bits. What we've also done, we've got a contract management handbook now, because we don't manage all the contracts across the council. There are officers in pockets of the organisation that manage contracts. And what we felt is there's no standardised documentations, there's no standardised audit trail on how these contracts are managed. So we've done a lot of work rolling out last year this contract management handbook. And there was an audit last year on that, where there were some fundamental and significant recommendations. And when that happens, as many members in the room know, they do another audit quite quickly. Now, on yesterday, I signed off my comments on the latest contract management audit. And the assurance has risen to a substantial assurance, and all of the recommendations are green and merit attention. There are no reds or ambers, which was really good news. Not resting on our laurels, that doesn't mean there's not work to be done. There's some training going on for both my lead contract officers within my team, our lead contract lawyers, and those around the council, in order to make sure we are all working to the contract management handbook. But certainly I think that gets reported to the next Audit and Accounts Committee if you want to have a look at that, and that can give you some reassurances about where audit is saying actually we're doing really well, and where they say that there's still work to be done.
Because I'm thinking about specifics, examples, where there was significant balls dropped by this council and the contractor. Are you involved in appointments of commercial building contractors as well in your procurement stroke contracting role?
Knowing the values of those sorts of contracts, there would have to be a procurement officer involved in those, because there would at least be an overdue notice and a process to go through. So yes, a procurement officer would be involved in that.
So is there and I'll drop back off just after this one last question. Because the size of the contract that was one most recent where the balls were dropped was in excess of 6 million, is there a size beyond which accountability absolutely lies with the chief executive of this council, as total responsibility in the event that that contract is not working or fails, and we end up in hiring an adjudicator?
No, there's not a contract value that invokes that.
Well, can I, as a critical friend and a member of the Scrutiny Committee, strongly recommend, because we've already recommended it in performance, that I believe any contract in excess of a certain amount of money must have the ultimate accountability of the chief executive's blood on the contract line, because this specific problem that arose, no one was responsible for. And I said at the time in performance panel, I've never in my private sector experience ever come across an organisation where it was the largest contract we as a council had ever signed, and the chief executive wasn't responsible, the strategic management team wasn't responsible, nobody was responsible for what was really a huge value contract.
You know, I've taken a detailed interest in that contract, as you have, but I think you're stretching the role of this scrutiny committee in this commissioning process by raising that. I think that we are talking about very important things here, but of course there are some fairly well-known techniques that weren't applied in that case. I think it would be a completely different issue if we're going to properly scrutinise and then come up with recommendation on that. And I think you're in a sense clouding the issue of the commissioning process that's going on by. So I'm agreeing with you about the issue, but not about it being raised here. Councillor Golding.
Thank you.
Yes.
The particular item that Councillor Keeble is referring to is on the agenda tonight, and it's on page 148 of 150, if we ever get there.
Well, we will get there because we are now coming to a decision on my proposal, but Councillor Golding reserved his...
You're after him. Down on the list.
It's the first time I've spoken this evening. Goodness me. Thank you, Chair. I will say a few things. Firstly, I'm not at all surprised by the difference between the surveys that were conducted by this committee and the surveys that are reported in the officers' report. As has already been pointed out, the survey that the officers have reported were how people felt at the end of the COG sessions, and they were overwhelmingly happy with the way the sessions had been run, with the way they'd been listened to, and it was only after the event that people turned out to be unhappy. And having chaired the CEP committee that considered the outcome of COG 1, where people were repeatedly told that they'd wasted their time because it was predetermined, which was a complete myth, but they were told it over and over again, I'm not surprised they were unhappy by the time they filled in this survey. So I think we should take great comfort from the fact that people were happy with the process at the time. Whenever you have options, there are always going to be some people who it isn't what they wanted comes out of it, and they will be unhappy after the event. So I'm not surprised by that. And I'm sure that the outcome of the COG 1 wasn't predetermined, because I remember only too well that the proposal in relation to Proteus changed somewhat between the report being written and the meeting being held, and changed again between the meeting being held and the cabinet member making his decision. So we were very grateful that it wasn't predetermined, that we were having some influence. But I just want to comment on some of the proposals that I've picked up. I think the idea of having 2 whole days is very welcome. It will address the concerns about, there's quite a lot in the surveys about people not staying the course, and that people were there at the start and not at the end. And having the 2 days, I think, should help incredibly with that. I think on your right-hand column, possible ways forward, I think there was one that isn't in the paper, which was something like you were going to get it to committee a lot longer before it goes to the cabinet member. And I have to say that whatever the words were, I really think that's, as particularly as chair of one of the committees, that is very welcome, because I think what went wrong, for the best of intentions with the COG 1 was that actually, again, contrary to what has been said, there were options in the paper. There were several options in the paper. As I recall it, in relation to the most contentious point, several of the committee explicitly had recorded in the minutes that they favoured an option which was not the one favoured by the majority of the committee. So there were options. But what the portfolio holder, I think, had done, because I assume it was his direction rather than the officers, had actually given a very clear steer as to which was the preferred option, which rather threw people, because we're not used to having quite such a clear steer. In officers' papers, we get all the options, and then you have to look at the recommendation back at the beginning to be really sure which one we're being steered at. So I suspect it'll be helpful if there is a less clear steer when it comes to committee in future. I think it was a very noble effort, but it clearly backfired. So getting it to the committee earlier before the portfolio holder has made up their mind, and giving us a chance to actually have more influence at an earlier stage would be very worthwhile. The other point, I think, that the third of the ones in the prepared slides in relation to the CEP was the liaison between relevant portfolio holders to be read. And I think it was slightly confusing that, I mean, clearly anything to do with commissioning has to involve finance, but it also has to involve the portfolio holder responsible for the subject area. And I think, again, with hindsight, it's right to pick up that could have worked better. So I think, finally, I think the working group idea seems very sensible, because, again, that was one of the things that came out of the CEP and COG 1, that the COG members had completely lost sight of how you'd got from A to Z, and involving them in the process, helping them to see what's happening. There will still be some who won't like the outcome because it wasn't what they wanted, but at least they will be clear as to what's happening, and realise that it's not something that was stitched up beforehand, but something that you're making up as you go along. Okay, thank you. So I support your proposal to have a working group, but I hope or whatever it was, but I hope it won't reject a lot of hope it will be to work out the practical implications of these proposals, which seem very sensible, not to redo this, yet have another go at the process.
Working on the wording as people speak. Councillor Keating, of course.
I simply wanted to support your suggestion, Chair, that we do have a working group. Thank you.
Again.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I've stayed quiet for a considerable period of time since earlier. Thank you very much. It's interesting tonight listening to the presentation from our guest. I'm not surprised he was rolled out, and I'm not surprised he said what he said. I've seen his video online and the videos from the university in terms of their direction on commissioning, so I understand where they're coming from. It would be interesting to have a counterbalance from another academic who would have a different view. As ever, stick 3 academics in a room and you get 3 different opinions. Stick 3 politicians in a room and you get 3 different opinions. I think the point about this is, what substance do you take from that? And I took the robustness of our procedures and processes for legitimately and honourably listening to an in-house and assessing an in-house bid have been sorely wanting. And I think that's been exposed by this process so far. And I think we do a disservice to our staff to allow that to continue. So constructively, if this process carries on in the way that most members are talking about it, I think the use of, the preparation of, the support given to and how staff in this authority bring forward in-house proposals that aren't the status quo. An in-house bid is not the status quo. An in-house bid can be innovative of its own right based upon the talent that we have in this organisation, which is something else that Mr Briggs commented upon, which was that we have a considerable amount of talent in this authority. We've lost a lot as well. There are as many authorities insourcing as there are outsourcing. And I guess my greatest fear has always been a preconceived agenda in this from the Cabinet, and I've not got confidence that that isn't there. Nothing that's been said, and the politics that's been played on this, from our side defending our position and how value we feel, as much as your side arguing your corner, is that you haven't got a preconceived notion of where you're going with all of this. And I don't want to see our council go down the Serco or Capita route. I don't think that's appropriate. Suffolk went there. Suffolk went there. And look what happened to Suffolk in terms of it falling to pieces as a local authority. If you wanted a genuine process where you were looking at the aspiration that our learned colleague suggested this evening, then I think the danger you have here is this has become a monster of its own. You've kind of got to a position where the COG process and the COG team are justifying their own existence. They might be perfectly reasonable in what they're proposing. I have issues with it, as you would expect, but they've come to self-justify, and that's a problem for me, because what actually is at the heart of this? Talk to partners on the arts and the culture bit. They didn't feel party to it in the way that others have expressed. They didn't feel engaged. They didn't feel the outcomes were appropriate to their input. The survey bears that out if you actually want to pay any attention to it. So taking this forward constructively, I think the analysis that can be done by the commissioning team is incredibly simplistic. They're not housing experts. They're not transport experts. They're not experts in the fields of policy to which they are now applying judgment and decisions in bringing reports forward. And yes, they are doing that because they're writing the very reports that we consider. They're writing the very things that we delay. And I've sat in meetings where I've been told by the housing team, we just haven't got the capacity, guys. We haven't got the capacity to do the work that Scrutiny wants us to do, that the policy committees want us to do. So they can't engage in a way that perhaps they need to on something as important as the future of policy on homelessness in this town. For that matter, the partners can't, because a lot of the partners aren't sat around the table, Chair. So there are fundamental process issues that no matter the nice dressing up in a nice presentation by the commissioning team to justify their role, which I respect and understand but disagree with, still don't answer those questions raised by those partners and those individuals. And I do not believe that the commissioning team should be the ones preparing the documentation in the way they do, that is, as it were, policy devoid of those experts in that field, which is no criticism of you guys, but that's not your expertise. If I want a homelessness strategy, I want a homelessness direction, I want the homelessness team and officers and partners to be directly involved in the writing of the thing. What I don't want is your interpretation of what you think they said on the back of a post-it note. I think that's the issue. And I don't want councillors going to a workshop with a post-it note exercise saying, I'll have half a line and I'll stick it on there and that's my contribution. That's not how you design a homeless strategy for Basingstoke. So there's some fundamental concerns here that I've still got of process and how we actually get from what you want to the outcome. In terms of the procurement, I think it would be lawful to have the in-house bid appropriately considered. And I would be concerned about the law in terms of how we go about excluding, and particularly in COG 1, of how the in-house was excluded in the way it was. So I would personally be interested in investigating that area because I'm not necessarily sure to the best of my lay knowledge that was appropriate by the way that procurement should be undertaken. And in terms of constructive points, I think the COG should come out with a long list of options, that have been carefully considered by the COGs if you're going to do it. Whether or not that COG should then recommend particular ones is a different matter, because it depends who sat around the table at that particular time to recommend that particular course of action. Whether they provide the options that you draw down on is an important point, rather than those that just shout the loudest or those who are able to turn up on that day when those conclusions are drawn up. The option should always include the in-house or an as-is, as has already been said. I'm just adding to what has been already agreed, I hope. Then the relevant committee, as has already been said, I think, and I pick up on what Councillor Golding said, should be consulted on the long list in the way you described by being a lot earlier. The Cabinet member should in no way, shape or form have any preconceived position on this. I think the Cabinet member should genuinely, constructively engage with the committee and members if they want to then draw up some conclusions. And admittedly, I think that was fundamentally where COG 1 went wrong, because you were overlapping reports where conclusions were being drawn and things were getting wrapped up in a way that was wrong. And then the Cabinet member draws conclusions. But I do have some pretty fundamental problems with the way this is being done. And you can academically tell me this is innovative. Doesn't mean it's the right thing. Suffolk screwed up terribly. Other authorities where they've gone down a lot of this road have screwed up terribly, and their residents have suffered. I don't want us, just for the sake of process, just for the sake of commissioning the bee's knees, to do this, particularly when there is a whole debate about devolution of power from central government to local government about to hit us, that will transform this debate anyway. And I don't want us to be stuck on the old hat when the new hat is where we really need to be.
Councillor Keating's eager that we move on with the agenda. Can I say that the answer to most of what you're saying, Paul, is for us as councillors to get stuck in to make jolly sure that what you believe is going wrong doesn't go wrong. And my proposal, which I'll now read, I think it might be coherent.
I just have two sentences as the chair of the committee to respond to that, which will be a harmonious response that might help.
Councillor Keating,
I'm lost, Chair. Where are we?
I'm going to make a proposal, but I've been told there are two speakers yet to speak. So, Councillor Cubitt.
Just as a final point, one of our members has just made some comments about papers not being written by the commissioning team, and you're totally entitled to that view, but we should all remember the audit of this council and the findings of the audit of this council, and one of the areas that we were lambasted on was the fact that the officers were bringing papers to committees and owning those papers when actually the papers should belong to the cabinet members. And there is a bit of a contradiction therefore, because I think truthfully it was very clear from cross-party councils that were involved in the audit of this council's failings, was that all the papers that come to our committee should belong to the cabinet members, because it goes back to the point that I was raising earlier, which the chair said he didn't want me to discuss, but which I think is fundamental to everything, is the responsibility. So you're totally entitled to your views, but the truth is that paper shouldn't belong to Lisa. It should belong to the portfolio holder or whomever is the committee member, and that and ultimately that's about who has political power.
Councillor Golding, last speaker.
Just very quickly, I just wanted to say where we are looking at something where there is a substantial in-house activity. Currently, I entirely agree with Councillor Harvey that that the option of the in-house team doing something different should always be included. It was there in relation to COG 1, in relation to CAP report, but it was rather well hidden in the report, so that was a thing that was an option. But I have, since the meeting, confirmed with the head of commissioning and governance that it, as part of the soft market testing, it is something that is open to being considered if the in has 200%. And when it comes back to CEP, we will be looking very carefully to make sure that it has been considered.
Now, I'm quite keen on the idea of the so-called policy committees doing pre-scrutiny, because if we're told we're only doing post-scrutiny, and they are overview and scrutiny committees, and they should be. So to scrutinise something before it's got to the point of being a contentious decision seems to me to be ideal. Now, what I'm proposing is as follows. That a task group should be formed to recommend a clear and unambiguous process for councillor involvement in and visibility of the work of commissioning outcome groups. Would anyone like to suggest an improvement on that?
Chair, am I going to get a chance to speak in the debate, or has that been wiped away from me now?
There will now be a debate on my proposal, and I'm sure you're going to want to speak then.
Twice.
Nobody's twitched, so have I got a seconder for that proposal, please? Councillor Miller. Right, Councillor Pearce. You wish to...
Yeah, I absolutely agree with the issue of accountability that has been raised. I don't think anybody should be questioning that. But I do want to pick up on some of the other points that were made. In the training and development arena, trainers particularly tend to give out an assessment sheet at the end of the training course. Surprise, surprise, it's known colloquially as the happy sheet. And generally speaking, at the end of a session, it's quite upbeat. People think that they've had a good time and so on. So I'm not surprised, in fact, that a number of people said that they were happy at the event, and then subsequently appeared that they weren't happy, having had time to go and think about it. But again, I think the problem for me is more fundamental than that. And I'll explain. I was invited to chair this committee on the 10th of November. Quite a daunting prospect, particularly as a number of people didn't think I should be doing it. But that apart, it finished at nearly 11 o'clock. There was a significant report written on the findings of that committee. And what I find unacceptable is that when I presented that report to Cabinet, there were a whole list of issues in that report. And I'm sorry, Councillor Isaac, but you didn't address any of them. And so I've little confidence at the moment in this committee being able to have any influence if we're going to spend 4 hours debating something and end up with a substantial report going back to Cabinet for the Cabinet member and the rest of the Cabinet not to take any notice of it. And I remember clearly Councillor Chapman MBE saying when the Haymarket issue was going ahead and they were going to split it off, and we've seen what's happened there, but Councillor Chapman said exactly the same thing. There were bundles of papers that went through the call-in process, and he said, I've seen nothing new. Now, I don't think that's the way this council wants to operate. I don't think that we should be seen publicly. Sorry? He was at the time. In 2006, I'm talking about. All right, keep up. Yeah, well, it's history, but the point is, Councillor Miller, it is history, but the point I'm making is nothing has changed. That people can devote time, devote their energies, devote their beliefs, wreck their marriages sometimes, produce a report that is whitewashed by 3 simple words: heard nothing new. And I don't think that's right.
Right.
So I have absolutely no confidence in the process.
Can I call a halt there and may I point out which government it was that introduced cabinet government local councils? And I agree with everything you say, and I was against it at the time. Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. The thing that I'm concerned about is simplicity and transparency. And I have been concerned all through the COG process with identifying who is making what recommendations and where they're going to. So I have a motion which I'd like to put on the table, that the key outcome of ACOG should be a long list of options for the future delivery of service. That the COG produces no recommendations about these options. That the options should include an option for the service to remain in-house. and or an option for as is, same thing, that the relevant committee, the policy committee, is consulted about the long list. So the COG produces the long list, it goes to the committee is consulted about the content of the long list and is able to express their preferences, and that the relevant committee makes recommendations on the options to the portfolio holder. Now, clarity is what we need here. We don't need, let's pretend to do this or let's set up a working party. We need clarity. This provides absolute clarity. Thank you. I so move.
Sorry, yes. There is a motion under debate, and I'm going to resolve that, and then we can ask the meeting if they want to support Councillor Keating's motion. Proposed by me, seconded by Councillor Miller. Does anyone else want to speak on my proposition? Well, contrary to normal, Councillor Keating, yes.
I don't see your proposition of a working party being contrary to mine, so I support your proposition of a working party. Thank you.
But I'm going to do the thing that apparently outlawed these days and have a vote. With those in favour of my proposal, please show. I'll repeat it, certainly, that a task group will be formed to recommend a clear and unambiguous process for councillor involvement in and visibility of the work of commissioning outcome groups. Councillor Keating's motion is on the table. Do you want to press it, or do you want to put it to this task group of which you will be a member?
Well, first of all, can I say, Chair? I'll decide what committees I'm on. Okay.
You already volunteered.
Secondly, can I say your suggestion of a working party can take my motion if it's carried and integrated. So I do wish this motion to be put on to the vote if necessary, but I do need a seconder.
That's seconded by Councillor Regan. Who would like to? Yes, that's what I was going to say. Would anyone like to talk about it? Well, what a surprise!
Somebody's got light on.
Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Keating. I think that Councillor Keating's motion is eminently sensible. However, it rather negates the purpose of the task force that we've just all agreed to. So what I think should happen is not for it to be voted upon, but for it to be parked with the task group that you've just set up.
Anyone disagree with that? No. Councillor Harvey, and
Just bear with me. This is. Just bear with me. I'm not wasting time for the sake of it. I want to say something related to what the process is at the moment. We're debating this tonight, and the COG process is carrying on. We're going to set up a task group. That's going to take time to arrange the meeting, and the COG process is carrying on. I think there's an argument to be made, at least, that I would ask the Cabinet and the commissioning team to slow down on even more on their process, to allow at least this. Otherwise, what's the point? Because you're going to push this off, all right? You're going to push all of that off to a committee. The idea of having a long list and so on that Councillor Keating has just said as the motion. Unless that's in place and we do that, exactly as Councillor Golding has already said this evening in terms of the committee, then the COG process just carries on regardless. I don't think it should. I think it should pay heed to what has been said around this table this evening. If you pass this, at least then the things we've spoken about can be put into action, rather than kicking it into the long grass and wait for the task group to set up to talk about things before the COG gets to a long list, which is what the task group are talking about.
on the contrary, Paul, I think that a lot has been said that's in pleasure at what the strategy team are proposing to do anyway, and they're going to carry on doing that. And they'll bear in mind that we really want to know what's going on, and we do want to, we certainly want pre-scrutiny to take place in the so-called policy committees. It's the potential ambiguity and lack of clarity of the process that I'm trying to address. But I think many of us are encouraged tonight to want to see the process going in the direction that the head of services instructed. Councillor Golding.
Very briefly, as someone who does not expect to be on the task list, can I please ask the task group to consider deleting the word long? We do not want a long list of useless recommendations when the COG are clearly agreed that there were 2 or 3 very worthwhile ones. It should be an appropriate list, a list of the worthwhile list. So long, which was in there twice, should be taken out, please, because we don't want to waste our time. And the other thing you need to clarify is there won't always currently be something in-house. You can't always keep it in-house. Where there is something in-house, then it should be an option.
Sorry, I've just been reminded that we can't decide on Councillor Keating's motion, and I'm not proposing that we do, that nor is he anymore. It will go to this task group. Councillor Miller? And then Annally.
Very quick comment. I heard, what the task group should be doing, looking at the process and everything else. There's something that we mustn't lose sight of. Somebody mentioned something about cost. You can't put options down when they haven't got some idea of an order of costs, because you could be recommending something that comes out that's totally impractical to implement through costing. You could go for a diamond-plated solution. Hey, that sounds very, very good, but we'll never afford it in the month of Sundays. And it's deliver value for money. Power 1.4 on the recommendation. That's got to be a priority of what this council decides for our residents, because they're the ones who pay for it. But that's got to be included in whatever recommendations that come out at the end of the day.
Councillor Kubert?
Just very quickly, just in reference to Councillor Golding's comment about only considering in-house if we already have existing in-house. I think the example that Lisa cited of us doing in-house dog wardens when it was outhouse before means that mustn't be a limiting factor on evaluation of in-house as an option.
I've been named. I didn't say that. I said you can only have an option of keeping it in-house where it's in-house. Yes. You can have an option of bringing it in where it isn't. You can't have an option of keeping it in where there isn't.
Councillor Pearce, we're going to ambiguity.
What do you want to rule out with me this time, Chair? No?
Nothing at all. Nothing at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm interested in the value for money question. All I think I want to say is that there are different ways of calculating and determining the value for money. And that may well include, as I wish it did, for example, in the transport sector, of clearly us as the authority incurring a cost because the community need it and not because it costs more money. And I think we need to bear that in mind.
Can I say, I think all of these points that are being made now can be made in the commissioning process if we start taking part in it. I want to appoint a task group now, and I've seen 2 volunteers, I think, Councillor Miller and Councillor Keating, and I'm volunteering as well. Councillor Pearce, would anybody else like to join this? And we'll be guided very much by... No, ideally not big. So we have 4 members and appropriate officers. Councillor Harvey?
I'm just conscious that Councillor Potter has been part of the original. He's not here this evening, and I suspect David would like to give him the option at least.
Okay, I don't mind as long as we get on with it now. But we are not, I think, asking anyone to slow down. We're asking them to take account of all of these things in what they do. And it could be that some of them will come and join us at the task group. Who knows? But I'm closing that out. 5 Chairman has suggested a 5-minute break. So we will have a 5-minute break. Yeah. Can we reconvene now, please?
Get your seat.
Update from the performance panel. Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. I'll ignore the people who are talking in the audience, in the hope that they might even come and join us. Can I first of all say, it's late at night and you've had these papers for a considerable number of days. This information comes first to the performance panel, but it then goes on sometimes to audit and on other occasions to different committees. If anybody has any queries about the contents of paper C, I would happily attempt to answer them at this point. I am not the performance panel officer. I am simply the committee chair. The performance panel receives a number of indicators, some of which are monthly, some are quarterly, and some are half-yearly, and some are annual. So on occasion you'll find there's very little variation because there's no update as yet. Okay, so don't worry about that. The first and most important issue, I suppose, is the finances of the council. And it shows really that we got just over £750,000 less spent than we were anticipating. Now, in many respects, that's a good result, and other respects it may not be. The planned income in relation to planning and planning costs is severely impacted by the cost of appeals being successful against us. So we need to be very careful when we're talking about planning and planning matters, because we're incurring substantial cost in terms of appeals. That, of course, is directly related to the fact that we haven't got a local plan as yet. Can I move on in terms of capital monies? Capital monies is, again, a substantial variance, improvement in a sense, but interest rates are so low that we're hoping to get more later, because we want interest rates to go up a bit. The revenue survey, the revenue summary, which is on page 74. Again, we have a total met by council tax for the forecast 6,349,000. Any questions so far? No. Thank you. Thank you for all your questions. Democratic representation, I find very odd, really, because we've saved 30 grand, but we're not signing up people to the local register.
I saw Councillor Harvey wishing to ask you a question, sure.
Pardon?
He was pulling your leg.
May I make a point for the minutes and the record? Thank you, Chair. Can I draw members' attention to 102 and 103, because that'll help me just run through. We should draw as committees our attention to the red. It would be remiss of us not to. And I do want to emphasise, without being key 5 and key 6 obviously are in the red, the recycling. There's enough going on and enough said about that. I just want to raise the issue of homelessness. And I really want to flag this up, because every single time we get this report at the moment, quarter after quarter after quarter after quarter, is that in the red. And at the moment, I haven't seen an officer response to that in any way, shape or form justifies. You know, we used to get the whole, these is what we're going to do, these are the tasks, this is how we're going to deal with it. Just to put it in perspective, Chair, and I want this on the record, according to the latest figures as I understand it, we have a 53% increase in homelessness approaches in this borough. That's a massive increase. We're talking about that being just in the 9 months. So we're talking about nearly 1,500 cases in 9 months of this year. 1,500 approaches. The actual homelessness acceptances is up 420%. The number of people in B&B is up 20%. And the actual private sector placements in regard to homelessness has trebled in 6 months. That's why I'm highlighting it. If those... No, it isn't,
Well, that's what
because there's background to the papers, Chair. No, you can't.
Well, what is in the paper is a red mark on
It
the
is, and
performance.
those are the figures that
So
relate
it's
to
not-
why it's red. Those are the figures that relate to why it's red. That's the point, Paul. That's the point. The evidence is from our officers. The point...
Can I indicate, can I please interject? Sorry, if you want, Councillor Miller, to have a look at what feeds the red mark, you look at page 118. And it's called K10. Okay. Not at all.
I'm flagging it up, Chair, because it's consistently red, and to the extent and the crisis that there, I would be remiss of me not to flag it up. And my final point relates to the whole of the organisational bit. How many of those have now tipped into yellow on the second page, 103, from where a significant number of them were previously green? Again, it would be wrong of us just to leave that, and I do note that customer complaints has now gone red. So we do need as a committee to thank the performance panel for doing that, but we should highlight those issues back to the Cabinet that we are concerned about those.
No problem. But Councillor Keating, are you content that those points be referred to Cabinet now?
Oh, very much so, Chair. One of the points that we made at the performance panel was we have the detail behind each of those colours, but there's little value in us reporting to the Cabinet that we're doing great on this, we're doing great on that, the greens and perhaps even the yellows. The reality is, if we don't focus on the reds, which is where we're failing, then the performance panel has no value. So we have focused on the reds. And the first red of substance is the increase in recycling household waste. No, we have been failing at this for a substantial number of years. We're the worst performing council in Hampshire. We've got the highest costs in Hampshire, and we're not actually coming out of the red year after year after year. And I find that totally unacceptable, because what the performance panel is being told, we're failing, but we haven't actually achieved coming out of the red
But
year after year.
can I point out that there is a scheduled scrutiny of that issue in which you're invited to take part by the appropriate Overview and Scrutiny Committee?
I'm sure you're right, Chair, but the reality is I'm reporting on what the scrutiny panel discussed and were concerned about. We can discuss and report back what we do about it later when we're done. But currently, we were focusing on the reds at the performance panel, and I have repeatedly said at performance that if it's in the red, I understand it. You can explain to me why. If we don't fix it, then that's where I actually go and become unhappy.
I think the proposition was that this committee should take it up with the Cabinet. Was that right, Paul?
Absolutely. But there's no impetus.
Would it not be better to narrow our target? And Paul's first point about the homelessness, I wonder if we should try and ask the relevant portfolio holder to report to the next meeting of the performance panel on that.
Well, obviously this committee can decide for themselves, and it's not for me to tell them what to decide. But if we've got most of our activities in the green, most of them in the green, then the two that are in the red that are long-term, serious impact, I believe they should both be reported to Cabinet. Thank you.
Councillor Pearce?
Briefly, I promise. Taking up the point that the red is important on page 11, sorry, on page 112 of 150, at the top of the page, does rag mean colour of flag? Red rag to, is that what it means? No, it was my poor attempt at comedy. It's obviously too late in the day. But I do think it's doesn't the silence help? We are desperately poor at recycling, and I have to say that the proposed actions don't really induce any excitement in me to improve the position. We recycle a lot less in terms of stuff from the household than other councils, and other councils have 3 and 4 different sorts of bins, and that's one of the reasons that we don't. And I'm also absolutely amazed at the fact that it appears people are recycling less, and the glass issue, I do not understand why in quarter 3 and quarter 4 it doesn't go up, but apparently it doesn't. But I don't think the proposed actions will bring any significant change.
The point I've made is that we've already taken that on board, and we've discussed putting it on our work programme. We've agreed there'll be an action on another committee's programme in which Councillor Keating will take a full part. So I don't think that we have much to achieve by talking about it anymore tonight. I do think that what Councillor Harvey was saying about the homeless figures is something that we should take up, and I thought the way to do it was to ask the cabinet member to report to the performance panel. Is that agreed? Councillor Golding?
On both points, household waste is on the agenda for CEP tomorrow evening, and can I just correct one thing for the benefit of people who are here? I'm told by officers that they're going to we are not the worst performing council in Hampshire. There are 2 or 3 worse than us, so that's well, it's still not good, but it's not good. No, well, we'll have a bit tomorrow. On the homelessness one, I would have thought the best way. I hope Councillor Miller's listening, but I thought the COG on homelessness was due to come to his committee in March. Yes. And I would have thought that was the best way to approach this. But just to say, having previously been the portfolio holder, I mean, I'm not, clearly the homelessness issue, but the number of the red things are the fact that we have put some people in bed and breakfast following flooding gets a red mark. That, it's got to be just a stupid indicator. I mean, you wouldn't want to not put, if you didn't put them in bed and breakfast, it would be a 0, which is what the target is. So the fact that we've helped people and put them in bed and breakfast is a nonsense. So
the figures are differentiated. Thank you to our officers for differentiating between those in B&B relating to and those in B&B relating to the flooding in particular. So they have differentiated the 2.
The flooding ones are also red. That's so that yeah.
Can I ask Councillor Harvey, are you a member of the Economic Planning and Housing Committee?
Strangely enough, I am, and if that's where it's going to go and that's where we're going to debate this, I'm fine with that. We'll roll with that. And
yes,
quite happy
so we so recommend that Councillor Harvey turns up at that meeting. Councillor Keating.
No, Councillor Keating. Can I move on to the issue of bad debts? Why not?
Because debts, are they not on pink paper?
There is a white paper.
The detail on the pink paper will necessitate us adjourning at the end, and I don't propose to do that.
The pink sheet is only one element of the write-off of bad debts, and I had no intention of looking at that fine detail. The write-off of bad debts is a standard routine process, and a lot of it is monies that cannot be collected for a variety of reasons. There is no obvious inefficiencies in the collection of debts, and there is no obvious reasons which contribute to bad debt in terms of our performance. It is external factors such as people going bust or becoming, what do they call it? Insolvent or even dying. You're dead right. You're dead right. Nonetheless, yeah, absconding, running away. I can't spell absconding. So the reality is, I think bad debts is currently within reason. But the main item that we discussed at the last performance panel was in relation to the Mal's contract. The Mal's contract was the most significant issue discussed and dealt with by the performance panel, certainly in the last 12 months. We had the conclusion of the project, the builders leaving the site, and the project actually working in the town centre, but we had significant problems in terms of costs and claims against us by the construction companies. We ended up paying some millions more than we should have, or certainly more than we contracted. We analyzed that with the people that came to visit us. We interviewed them, and they quite clearly told us that there were uncertainties within the contract which contributed significantly to the over claims for additional monies. We noted very seriously that the senior management team, and by that I mean the chief executive and the two executive directors, only got involved exceptionally late in the day. They weren't significantly involved in any shape or form in the awarding of the contract, and they weren't significantly involved in any obvious during the contract, even when it was identified that the contracts were going off the course that we were expecting. The senior director, the chief executive especially, was significantly involved in the final negotiation to conclude how much we're going to pay extra. We believe that the senior management, and I don't mean the senior management team, because that includes all the heads of service. The senior management, by the executive directors and the chief executive, should not be hands-off to the extent that they were on this level of contract. They should be hands-on, and they should be responsible for ensuring that things are run smoothly or things are put right at the point at which they're going wrong. That is not happening currently, and that is something we would wish to see significantly improved by specifically asking the three senior officers of the council to be responsible and to be held responsible if things go wrong and we have to shell out another couple of million. Now, I've been deliberately vague, but it's important that these things are said, and they should be said here and now because this is performance, and we would hope that we wouldn't be putting any new handcuffs on the new chief executive as of when he arrives. It's not intended to embarrass him, but it would be intended to ensure that he did not stand on the sidelines while things were going wrong until you were signed the checks in the end. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Kiva, did you want to raise any points on the performance panel?
I mean, the point I raised earlier about the fact that I quite like if a contract's worth X, chief executive has to have responsibility throughout, because that's not mentioned in the summing up on our committee sheets. So I would like to see that. Secondly, don't want to be boring, but on the refuse issue, The people who complain the most come from the centre of Basingstoke, where the population is 100,000, and the villages are 60,000 of our borough. And it is, unfortunately, the town that is the shocker on the recycling. And I don't know about you, but I don't really, I mean, you can have a debate about this tomorrow or whenever, but I mean, I really do think there's no point in us kind of skirting around the issues and not dealing with the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is unfortunately Basingstoke town that has the biggest problem with recycling. And I don't think many of your residents would want in some, because I know the centre of Basingstoke very, very, very well, but I'm really not sure they'd want 4 different dustbins. I think politically that would be not very supported by your residents who elect you.
Oh, no, it's very late. And
No, I know, but
just another committee is dealing with that.
No, I know, but I'm just, because every time we talk about dustbins, nobody ever talks about the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is the problem is the centre of Basingstoke. And the people who are so vocal about it are the people where the problem lies. And we're all subjected to it. And the second thing they wouldn't like is what was advocated in the newspaper last week, which is people going through people's dustbins. Because I don't want to live in a world like that. I don't want people going through my dustbins and then telling me off. Because that's where we're heading if you don't like the proposals that are on the table tomorrow night.
Chair, just a general point. I mean, obviously the performance panels existed for many, many years. And I think when we started this scrutiny process, the concern for all those members of over the years of the performance panel is we do a lot of sterling work in digging through the red, amber, green, and we look at all the reds and we decide that, you know, the example of the homeless one, if it was just because of flooding, then you would say, well, actually, let's not take that any further. There's a reason why we're in the red, and just pick out the salient points and bring them to a committee. They're always at the end, and everyone goes, agreed, and we go home, and nothing ever gets done. We are in a position of sort of post-decision scrutiny. We are the ones that scrutinise the existing rather than creating. And whilst I appreciate it's unfortunate the 2 big red issues in terms of recycling is already earmarked for another committee, and so is the homeless. But we should be making sure we get this earlier on in the agenda so that we can actually pick out the salient points where we want to review the policy. Now, because the Ofcoms are already reviewing the homeless strategy and the recycling policy, the 2, or this time, have gone. But as Councillor Cubitt says, you know, skirting around the issues and things like that, there is a problem with, yes, we can make comment that deals of a certain value should be held by, or the chief executive has to be held accountable, but that needs to go into a policy, into a document. You only achieve that by reviewing the existing document, the existing constitution, looking at that one element of the constitution and saying, now, where are we now? How do we need to change that to reflect the concerns we have and make that recommendation? And I think we keep making comments to this. At some point, we've got to pick up the issue. The performance panel do the digging for us. They find out the big issues. Councillor Keating always very eloquently brings them to us. We should be saying, thank you, Councillor Keating, we agree with you. That's something where we want to review the existing policy, get the policy in front of a committee, in front of the public domain, question the officers, question the portfolio holder, and actually do scrutiny of the existing policy. At the moment we're not, we're still just drifting this. Thanks, Sean, for your off we go.
I agree with you, actually, Gavin, because you'll have seen that there was an action for someone to supply me with the procurement strategy and contract management. We have not got any process that comes anywhere near what's needed for a contract like the malls, let alone bigger ones. So we could perhaps put those things together, both the accountability and the process for contracts, and to put that on our future agenda for scrutiny committee. Would that be agreed? I'm told that it's very similar to an item that EPH has programmed. Is that right? Because perhaps I can just come to that.
Absolutely, and it's something that's been going through my mind with Stefan. We're having to rejig the program for EPH because of other more pressing items that we've got to address. But that's one that has been very visible in my on my horizon, because that is best practice in business. And that's, I think, what's started this off. There's no mention of it in this particular report. I thank Councillor Keating for bringing it up now. But I think we'll elaborate what is in the work program for EPH and make sure that it is addressed. It's got so many implications to HR, employment contracts, everything. So it's going to be a very delicate subject, but we must address it. Couldn't agree, Chairman. Couldn't agree more.
Perhaps the committee can leave me and Councillor Miller to agree which of us actually leads on that, which committee. I'm quite happy for it to be EPH, but if it's going to be delayed by other things in the EPH programme, then it could be done here.
We three, the three chairmen, we have regular meetings with the directors to focus on, you know, are we addressing the important issues within the council anyway? And we'll certainly bring it up. I think all of us, we're all sitting here, we know what the subject is. We'll straighten it out.
Chair, can we have as an action of this meeting that Councillor Miller is going to come back and tell us what's going to be done with regard to setting up a policy with regard to contracts, so it doesn't evaporate into the ether like Councillor
I think the action has got to be on me because I'm the chair of this meeting. But those who've sat in on the performance panel when I've been interrogating people about the contract won't doubt my commitment to the process issue, and I accept what you've said about the accountability issue. Yeah.
I'll just make one serious point, Chair. We already have recruited a new chief executive. And I do think, in fairness to him, he needs to be given the opportunity to contribute to any review before we fix anything in concrete. Because the reality is we're changing the practice of 1,000 years here in Basingstoke, i.e. nobody is responsible for anything.
Can I say that at the very least we need to define in clear and unambiguous terms what the chief executive's got to address, because he might not believe it. Well, I've taken an action, but I don't expect to do it myself. We'll give the chief executive a chance. Anything else on the performance panel? No. The work programme. I propose the following changes. I have written to the Managing Director of Stagecoach South again, inviting him to join us in March to for the update on the partnership and the changes to the routes. I think the portfolio holder's view is that we should wait until it's all be done and then they've tried it out. My letter makes the point that it would be so much better if we can have a consultation before they've finally under that. The audit action review of all scrutiny functions here will be deferred until the first meeting in the new year, because it's the whole year that we're reviewing, and so that doesn't make any sense. I'm proposing that we ask the Registered Social Landlords Task Group to report back at the meeting in March. You'll know that the proposal is to have one-on-one meetings with the social landlords, and that has been discussed and there's other meetings, but it will be on that agenda. The first meeting in the year not only will deal with the audit action review of all functions, but I'm proposing that at that meeting the invitation to the Director of Public Health is implemented. We ask her to speak about what she wants to talk about, but mention that we're particularly interested in the focus on obesity. Is that agreed?
No comment.
Finally, yeah.
Is the director, I mean, the person who's going to discuss public health in amongst self obesity, are they going to be the Hampshire County Council guys? Because they're it's not
the Director of Public Health.
It's not our target, it's their target.
The Director of Public Health is a County Council employee.
But do we also want the cabinet holder responsible for public health in Hampshire County Council?
Can I say, I think the presence of the cabinet holder responsible for transport was not a help at our meeting on buses. I think we should get on very well with the Director of Public Health if we prepare ourselves properly.
I would urge caution because of what we got criticised on with regard to the audit of how this council was conducting its business, is that if we only have a director of public health and not the cabinet member, then if we have some issues that we're not happy with, we might be directing those questions to someone who would then might not feel politically able to answer in the same way that the cabinet member could.
I think we can live with that because it's just possible that somebody here may say something politically provocative that would then sidetrack the entire meeting on an argument about the county council budget. And I am personally satisfied the Director of Public Health is the right person to work with. And if she turns out to treat us with disdain or whatever, then we can go to cabinet members. No, please, Onley, I think we can work with the Director of Public Health. That's the end of the agenda. Thank you very much. I apologise, I fell dismally in my aim of my requirement to finish by 9:30, but there we are.